It's on. Yep, good. Okay. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of StatsThonk. It's been a little while since our last one because reasons, IRL and busy and procrastinating and all that kind of jazz. But we are back. So I'm not sure how we're gonna, whether we're gonna be able to stick to our thing of trying to do this every 2 weeks, but we'll try and get it out as often as we can. But we're back, and as we are recording this, it is Tuesday, the 10th of August in the evening, UK time, and so tomorrow on CIS and NA, 10.7 is going to hit the live servers, and then obviously on Thursday it'll be EU and C. And one of the things that comes with 10.7, along with things like a new dockyard and command changes and all that kind of stuff, is the submarines. So we're going to, and Missouri gamble boxes, but we're not going to. I know that's a hot topic right now, but we're going to stay focused. We're going to stay focused, and we're going to just talk about submarines, and we're going to try to resist the urge to jump onto other topics, because I think submarines is a pretty meaty topic, and I think it can easily fill a whole discussion. So that's what we're gonna do. So I am, as usual, joined by Mr. Killerbin. Hello, Mr. Killerbin.
Hello, Mr. Stats.
And hello, Mr. Painezor.
Hi, I'm Painezor.
Hello. So I already know that we have not necessarily differences of opinion, maybe differences of magnitude of opinion, perhaps. We're probably fairly well aligned on what we think, I think, but just how strongly we feel it's probably a bit different. So, and we probably have slightly different experiences of testing as well, so we can talk about that. Because testing was largely sort of a solo experience, so we can talk about that as well. So, as I was just saying before we pressed record on live stream, so we are recording this live on stream, by the way. So if you're watching live on Twitch, hello, but we are going to be largely ignoring chat, at least until the very end. So just sit back and relax. We're going to be covering how submarine testing has gone, just in case you're new to the game or you didn't get a chance to test any of the previous iterations. We'll talk about where submarines has been over the past few years, and then we'll talk about in a bit more depth about some of the more recent testing, particularly the 10.7 PTS testing and the changes that have come out around then and since then, and what that means for submarines. And then us three, will attempt to use our insight into the game and the community and apply our intelligence to predicting what is about to happen when submarines hit the live servers, in terms of player reactions and the meta and all that kind of stuff, and what might happen in the future. So I'm probably going to be doing a little bit of talking at the beginning because I just want to run through the history. So if either of you can remember anything, because I was actually trying to gather the information before the stream, like this afternoon, because believe it or not, we don't just sit down and start recording these. I actually do a reasonable amount of prep. So I've actually tried to gather a lot of information. I've currently got a whole load of browser tabs open. And what I was going to do was try and find every single test iteration and note down all the changes from test to test. And then I realized that's ridiculous because the number of iterations there has been huge, even just the public-facing ones. And the concept of the submarines has changed a fair bit over the last few years. And actually, the first time that we publicly got a clue, at least, that submarines were coming was actually the April Fool's event in, I think it was 2018.
Wasn't it Halloween?
2017. No, because don't forget there was that April Fool's.
The game.
Yes, the submarine that broke the game. They put, as a teaser, they put a unplayable submarine in your port. Do you remember? Maybe it was the year that you weren't playing.
Yes, that happened. And if you clicked on it, it broke your client.
If you clicked on it, it broke everything. And that was, a lot of people were like, oh, they're just joking around. They're never going to do submarines. And I think there were quite a few people sitting there going, I'm not sure about that. But then we actually properly got them a few months later, because Halloween 2018 was the first time that we saw submarines actually playable. And that was for the PvE event, the Halloween event. mixed in with I think they repeated the 2016 and 2017 Halloween stuff as well, like the surface ship stuff.
Yeah.
But they mixed the submarines in with it. I think that was right. And it was PvE. I think it was like 6 or 7 submarines, just like a normal scenario battle. But you were in a sub, and you could dive, and you could surface, and you could send torpedoes, and some of the mechanics were new. And if I remember correctly, back then it was things like the torpedoes were not homing, there was no pinging, depths were set, you couldn't dive and surface freely. You could surface.
I have a vivid memory of them. There was submarines with the secondaries, there was submarines with the freezing torpedoes, and it was all like a destroyer cone with like the white lead bar. So
that's right.
No pings or anything.
Yeah, it was quite a simple proof of concept back then, and I really enjoyed it. I'm not a big PvE player, but I did actually play that quite a lot. I thought they did a really good job, as usual, with the artwork for the Halloween event. The underwater world looked really cool. You had what I called Steve, which was the massive underwater monster that was kind of swimming around while you were doing it. The hard mode was ridiculously hard. The normal mode was pretty good. And then it had quite a lot of replayability, I thought. Did you two play much of that?
Yeah, I remember it vividly. You used to go have to kill Rasputin at the end of it, I believe, after killing a load of things on the way there, and it was actually really fun mode.
Yeah, it was quite difficult to do. It required a good amount of coordination, so it was a good fun once you got a bunch of people who understood what you needed to do and stuff.
Killerbin, your phone. Move it, please.
I'm deaf now, thank you.
Yep, nope, sorry. But no, yeah, it was a good little mode.
So then, obviously that was their test case to see what the reception was like, and I vividly remember making the YouTube video, because of course back then I was a YouTuber. I vividly remember making the video where I had on my snorkel mask. It's like, they've done submarines. And I remember being quite excited about it, but I think, there was the usual mixture of people being kind of excited about there being something new, and I think generally people enjoyed the event, but you could also feel, I think, the tension in the community, because people were like, bear in mind that this was only 9 months after, or 10 months after the CV rework.
No, this was before the CV rework.
No.
The Halloween submarines were definitely before the CV rework, because it was while I was still playing. And I took a break before the CV rework came out. So
no.
Hang on. 1 second.
Wasn't CV rework 2019?
CV rework was 2018, January.
2019, year of the CV. Because I started playing.
Hang on. So when was patch? So that was 080. Hang on. You might be right. So hang on, so we can work it out easily. So 10.0 was this January. 9.0 was 20. What year are we in? 2020. So 8 would have been 19. You're correct. Yes, 19. You're correct. Okay, so yes, it was just before the CV rework. So we were still blissfully ignorant at that point.
Yeah.
But I think when the submarines, when the CV rework hit, and so of course people are still thinking about submarines. I think there were probably quite a few people thinking, "Oh no, they're going to do the CV rework and the submarines. It's going to be one big mess." But of course, we still today don't have submarines on live.
We don't have a big mess.
Well, that is the whole question. Are we about to have a big mess? So since Halloween 2018, there have been to us at least publicly, an unknown number of closed tests, but there have also been quite a few public tests, including testing on a separate TST server, which was initially invite only and then was open to everyone, and then some testing on PTS and also recently live. And over that time, there have been lots and lots of changes to the way that submarines work. Some of them have been little tweaks to concepts. Some of them have been just whole, if you excuse the pun, sea changes to how the mechanics of the submarines work, including things like spotting, whether they can surface and how they surface, how quickly they surface, what their kind of focus is in a battle, what the torpedoes do. All sorts of different mechanics have come and gone and been changed. And as I said earlier, I tried to I started to write down what some of those changes were, and then just gave up because there's been so many iterations that it would go. You could write a book about the development of submarines quite easily.
One could not argue that Wargaming have dug their head in the sand, made one template, and gone, that's it. No one can deny that they've at least changed and adjusted and tweaked and reworked. As much as that word is potentially poisonous in this community at this point.
And I also distinctly remember just before the carrier rework, which, as we've now established, I was wrong. So around the end of 2018, we were also testing carriers at that point. We must have been. And I distinctly remember that Christmas saying, oh yeah, but I mean, you could still go and watch the video. Because I did an hour-long discussion with one of my old clanmates, basically where we were saying, hey, yeah, no, it looks pretty cool, but it needs at least another 6 months to a year's work to get it all polished. And then the next week they announced that 8.0 was going to be the CV go live, and we all know how that went. And I think the ensuing chaos and the effect on the meta and the community reaction and all the bad stuff that happened around the CV rework that then arguably has taken them until now to work on. I think they really took that to heart, and I think they've, to their credit, I think they've been very, very, maybe too cautious with testing the submarines and developing the submarines in a way that's not going to, at least not immediately, break the game. And that's why we've seen so many different test iterations. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. So without talking, not specifically thinking about the most recent testing and the most recent changes, just more generally, the concept of a submarine in the game. Let's just talk a little bit about what we think about various mechanics, because I'd really like to know, because I don't think we've really ever talked about this, what your thoughts are about some of the mechanics associated with submarines. So let's start with torpedoes. So the submarines, obviously, because they're submarines, have a small number of launch tubes, and so it makes sense that they can't launch that many torpedoes at the same time, because that's literally what they are. But Wargaming have basically invented this homing torpedo mechanic, kind of, which just doesn't exist for the surface ships yet.
Oh dear.
Although, well, I mean, if you're a games company and you have a mechanic that is reusable, like, for example, airstrikes, why would you not? So I would be very surprised at some point in the future if we don't see a surface ship that has homing torps. But that's a bit of an aside. So specifically for submarines, what do you two think about the concept in general of homing torpedoes?
I think it's kind of dumb. Like, honestly with you, it kind of I get that they only home if you ping somebody and you have to lock onto them, but it's not exactly like there is much counterplay to dodging the pings, so it kind of lowers the skill cap quite a lot, and it's going to be one of those classes in the game that doesn't really require much skill to play, and can, depending on how they tweak the numbers, can either overperform or underperform. I don't know. The thing is, it's not going to be a very skill-dependent class for dealing the damage. Sure, positioning, whatever, you can argue positioning all you want, but the direct damage dealing, you with more ships, you have to lead. You have to I don't know, you have to lead. You know what I mean? But the ping speeds is so fast, you don't actually have. It takes all of the quote unquote skill out of it. Even with torpedoes, you have to aim. With the new airstrikes, you have to aim. With guns, you have to aim. Fair enough, you have to aim the ping, but you don't have to aim it very hard. It's so fast that it's negligible. That's my thoughts on that.
They have actually, I should point out, they have actually changed the speeds of the pings in the most recent update so that they travel at, I think, surface velocity, which is the slower of the two from the test. So it'll be the same underwater, it'll be the same speed as it was on the surface in the last test. But I agree with you, yeah. I think, in my experience, though, you do have to do a little bit of planning in terms of your pinging, because especially when you're playing around islands, you need to bear in mind the fact that the torpedoes are stupid, and they will, because effectively what they do is they travel down the white line. So when you ping something, if that something is about to disappear behind an island and the white line is in the island, the torpedo will just go straight through the island and hit the island. So there is a little bit of brain cell you have to apply to it, but yes, largely it means that you don't have to lead your torps. You can just fire the torps vaguely in the direction of the ship, and then you can focus on pinging them. But so you're saying that you think these will have a lower, how should you phrase it, lower skill floor?
Yes, they're going to be relatively easy to play because you don't have to do such, well, dealing damage wise, the potential is going to be quite, like, depending on how they're tuned, it's going to be relatively easy because you don't have to lead as much.
What about skill ceiling? So, because some of the problem ships in the game, I mean, I talk about this all the time. This whole idea of a skill slope or a skill curve, where if you have a ship that a relatively inexperienced or bad player can do well in, the other end of that scale is how does an experienced or skillful player perform in that ship? And arguably, as long as the line is straight and it goes through the origin, then the ship is, in quotes, balanced and isn't going to break the game. The ships that are a problem is where it's a curve, perhaps, or it doesn't go through the origin, so it's too strong, it's too weak. Maybe very, very good players perform way more than they should do, perhaps.
Well, there's one thing I can see with that potentially is, I mean, imagine if you got really good at dumb firing them. I don't know what the best word to describe it is, but firing them without lock on from underwater.
Dumb firing would be correct.
Yeah. If your dumb firing is amazing and you don't have to like expose yourself to surfacing and pinging to increase the detectability range in that, you are going to by far outperform anybody who just relies on the lock on. You know what I mean?
But because you
putting themselves at risk.
But I think Wargaming have countered. I'm playing devil's advocate here a little bit. So because Wargaming have countered that by saying, hey, you only get the higher damage if you get a double ping. If you are blind firing, you're not going to be getting that alpha strike ever. And so there is a massive advantage to pinging things.
Fair enough, I suppose, but that doesn't make any more. I thought they removed the double pinging Citadel system.
No, as far as I know. I mean, there's been like hundreds. I've got all the changes open.
So many iterations now.
I think
that's the problem.
I thought they removed the Citadel mechanic, but they've just buffed the damage of the torpedoes.
I was under that impression as well.
My opinion on the guided aspect of the torpedoes is because the torpedoes are the submarine's only armament, and even at tier 10, you're firing 6 torpedoes, which are essentially pan-European torpedoes. The heavy, healthy ships at the tiers of 6, 8, and 10, and 5, 7, 9 that can face these submarines, like most of those torps aren't all that dangerous in terms of direct damage dealing. But I can understand why they were given an aid to hitting things, because you can only fire your 4, 6, 8 torpedoes every. What's the reload on them now? A minute or so?
Yeah, it's around that. So it depends on the nation.
Compared to someone who's playing a destroyer who's got their torpedoes and their guns, or if they're in a cruiser, like these subs can't set fires. They can't really force damage controls that effectively. So their only avenue to damage is the torpedoes. So I can understand, since they are restricted to one form of damage dealing, why the players are being given assistance in doing that.
And the problem is, and we've had this discussion recently on my stream, is that when people say, oh my god, like homing torpedoes is so stupid, just remove it. Like, okay, so let's say Wargaming agree with you, and they think that it's a mechanic that people don't like, but the submarines are still going to be there. So somehow you have to make them do the same amount of battle influence. And in terms of torpedoes, there's only two things you can do. You can either increase, because you can't increase the number of torpedoes, because that just doesn't make any sense, because they only have so many tubes. So you have to either decrease the reload significantly to help you hit more torpedoes, or you have to increase the damage, because you still have to make the submarine perform the same. And so let's just pluck a figure out of the air. Let's say you hit twice as many torpedoes if you have homing torpedoes as if you don't. That means you would have to halve the torpedo reload or double the damage. So would a submarine being able to spew out a torpedo every 30 seconds instead of every 60 seconds, would that be fun to play against? Because basically what you're then playing against is submarine venom. Stunned silence.
I just every time that the submarines come on in the dev blogs, I've completely lost track of the mechanics at this point. Basically,
yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, so I'm sat here thinking, it's like, well, what is the current average torpedo reload speed? Is what's the flooding chance like? What's all this kind of stuff? And then I don't know how the Citadel mechanic works, or if they've removed it, or if it's just torpedo protection that's ignored now, or anything. It's like they've gone through so many iterations that I'm just like, I don't have time to go read every single dev blog about it.
And I'm really hoping that they don't do what they normally do and just do iterative news posts, and they actually write this is how you play submarines guide, like they did a year or so ago when the first public tests came about. Because like all wargaming stuff, as they make changes over a long period of time, they never produce one place where you can go and get all the information. You have to go back and read the initial article, and then the changes to the article, and then the changes to the changes, and then the rework, and then the changes to the rework, and so on and so on and so on, to get all the mechanics there. So I really, really hope that they, do some kind of summary article or a how it works video or something like that, because that is definitely needed, and it's probably going to be easier for people who are coming into submarines for the first time, having not done any of the previous tests, because they're learning all this stuff for the first time, as opposed to us, where we've had an eye on it for 3 years. And so for us, it's hard to remember what the actual mechanics are now because of all the different changes. But I guess that's something we'll just have to kind of nail down once they go live, and we can actually see what they, how they perform. Because one of the things that's really confusing me right now is how spotting works. But I guess that's something we'll just have to look at when it goes live. Okay, so homing torpedoes, it's a thing, whether we like it or not, it's a thing. And they can still balance, because they can, we'll talk about this later, but they can change the speed of the torpedoes, they can change the damage, they can change detection, they can change the agility of those torpedoes. So there's lots of different balancing factors they can use to balance those torpedoes. So homing isn't the only issue there. Okay, so what about, so I'll lump these two together, but surfacing and depth control. So submarines if I remember correctly, in the Halloween edition in 2018, submarines started literally on the surface, and you could dive to one of 3 or 4 different depths using an up and down key. You couldn't dive freely. You had to stick to those depths. And your detection, I think it was pretty simple. Like if you were above the water, your detection was X, and if you were below the water, it was Y. I think that's how it worked. And obviously it's become more complex as the test iterations have gone on. And at some points they've removed the ability to surface. So do either of you have any opinions about whether submarines should surface, whether they should be forced to surface, and how spotting works in relation to being on the surface and being submerged?
Well, I think they should be forced to surface at some point, because we have to be able to see them and deal damage to them. Otherwise, why even, we have to be able to interact with them, right? Like, we can't just have this system in which an entity on a different Z level from the rest of the game just gets to freely rain damage up or down upon. Oh wait, I've already got that. It's called carriers.
Well, exactly, and the thing that concerns me about adding submarines in terms of the community reaction is that the thing that I think if you actually question someone about why they don't like carriers, as well as all the it's okay, if you talk to competitive people, they might have more insight, but the general average player, what it boils down to is there's this thing that's attacking me and I can't shoot back at it. That's basically the feeling behind it. And before the carrier rework, when there were actually very few carriers being played, and so you actually didn't see them that often, the same argument was applied quite regularly by battleship players to stealthy destroyers. I saw the same argument being made by Yamato players, arguing about the fact that they couldn't see the Shimakaze that was torping them and shoot back. And so this asymmetry and this it's unfair argument always comes up whenever you have a class which counters another class that you don't have a counter to. And so it's definitely a design consideration that Wargaming have had to take into consideration, the fact that you have to be able to fight back in some way. But ultimately, I think the game shouldn't be symmetrical, because otherwise all the ships become the same and it just becomes boring as hell. So just like this is my own feeling, is that if you get to the end of a battle and there's a Shimakaze and a Yamato, all other things being equal, the Shimakaze should win every single time. And I think it should be the same with submarines. If you have a stealthy submarine and a big fat target, the submarine should win, all things being equal. But there should be some situations in which the submarine should always lose. And you have to ask yourself, what is that situation? Arguably, with the way that it's set up at the moment, it's the ships that have the ability to detect and damage the submarine with ASW. The question is that enough? So do the destroyers and the cruisers particularly have the ability to find and destroy that submarine while submerged? That's a question that I don't think we've got an answer to right now, because we haven't really seen a representative test.
Not at the moment, no. The ranked test will be interesting to see how the community responds to it. Though my personal opinion on the subsurfacing is that yes, they should be forced to surface at times. But that's more purely based on reality and history of that they had limited dive times.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't sit underwater. Maybe high tier ones that had better technology.
Mm-hmm.
But my idea is essentially similar to how it was in other submarine related games, where it's not that after a certain, if you dive, there's a certain amount of time you can spend underwater. You have to surface, but then that dive time regenerates and you can go back down. So the submarine player has to choose the times when he's underwater.
Exactly.
And to compensate, on the surface, he moves faster.
Does the submarines move faster on the surface now?
Well, I don't think at the moment, not in game.
Now, no. They are.
But historically, subs moved quicker on the surface.
Okay, well, this is this thing. I don't know what the mechanics are anymore, because everything's so confusing.
Yeah, exactly. But I think a lot of the sentiment that I'm seeing coming out of the community is focused on counter submarine play. And I think you also have to think about the submarines themselves. Just like a lot of sentiment around carriers comes from the point of view of playing against them, not playing in them. And so from the point of view of the submarine player, which I did test extensively in every single test, the fact that they had forced surfacing, literally, when you run out of dive juice, that's it, you can't play underwater anymore. That felt horrible, because as a submarine player, you suddenly just feel... It felt exactly the same, actually, as an FPS carrier player who's deplaned. It's like, oh, well, I'm just dead now. Because you're on the surface, and if it's a carrier match, you're dead. And that ability to recover just a little bit of ability to do something is a sweet spot that I think they've now got right, because if you spend a little bit of time on the surface, if it's, you can finish fighting on one flank and there's a little bit of a battle left to go, you can surface while you move over towards the other side of the battle, and you get back 60, 120 seconds of dive time. But the thing for me is giving the player choice on both sides of the fight. But the main thing is that there is never a situation where the you have no counterplay as a team. I don't think that necessarily should apply to every single ship, like the battleship Shimakaze situation I talked about earlier. And you also shouldn't get into a situation where the battle goes full time because the submarine just goes to the bottom and hides.
Well, this is the problem, is underwater gives the submarine functional immunity. And, like, any other class that gets himself into a stupid situation, sure, you might be able to, like, smoke up or something, but you are not functionally immune. You can still be damaged.
Yeah, exactly.
You can still be shot in your smoke screen. If you get pinned behind an island by 2 ships, you can still be just, be crossfired, flanked, rushed, and all sorts of things.
And I think that's what the dive time mechanic is designed to force, is that if the submarine goes, oh, well, I'm just going to go to the bottom and stay there because I don't want to finish this fight, you can't, because eventually you're going to run out of dive time. And how much dive juice you have, I call it juice, how much dive juice you have is a balancing factor, and how effective like for example, is it the Americans or it's the Germans. The German submarines have that mechanic, the consumable mechanic, where you can kind of freeze your dive meter. That's also balanceable because you can change how much effect that has. So that, if submarines are hiding too much at the end of a battle, that's something they can tweak. They can give you less at the beginning, they can make that consumable less effective, they can increase the rate at which it goes away, and all sorts of things they can do to balance that. And honestly, thinking about how all those mechanics all work together, I think we're in a pretty good place right now in terms of it being fair for the submarine player and then fair for the surface ship players. Feel free to disagree with me.
I think what my problem is with this situation is because it's not a tangible thing, where the enemy's depth charge meter doesn't directly correlate in your head to the hit points of, say, a battleship who is in the same position. Like, if you've got a battleship trapped in the corner of the map and it's bow tanking, yeah, you can visibly see it getting whittled down. The submarine's hiding in the corner of the map from you. You don't know, like, there's no visual feedback that his dive capacity is being reduced. You know what I mean? It's like this disconnect mentally.
I mean, if you can see the submarine, you can see its dive capacity.
Well, if you can see the submarine, it's on the bloody surface and dive.
No, not necessarily.
Well,
if you can spot it underwater, yeah, at certain proximities. Yeah. And if you have a hydro, yeah. This is what I'm saying. Like, not all. So if you're the submarine who's left against a Des Moines with a hydro and a radar, then
radar spot submarines?
Yes, okay. You should be screwed. If you are a submarine who is against a Yamato, then you should not be screwed, you should be winning. If you're against a GK, which has a hydro, but is a large target, then maybe it's a bit more 50-50. And now, the one thing I don't know is which of those ships has anti-submarine strikes as well. Because in the most recent test, and previous tests, not all ships had ASW.
I think it's every ship with planes. If you got a catapult, okay. I think you get the depth charge flight at the planes, but don't quote me on that because I'm not certain.
But there are going to be some ships which have. It looks like there's going to be some ships which have literally no ASW capability. They have no ability beyond just driving up to it to spot a submarine underwater, and they have no ability to damage it underwater. That looks like that's going to be a thing, and I'm sure that's going to cause some consternation. But then that's the same argument as Shimakaze Yamato.
Well, no, because the Shimakaze Yamato, like, you can find an island, you can park yourself in a cap, you can force it to come to you. Like, there are things you can do to play around the situation.
Is that not the same with a submarine?
Not really, because even if it surfaces next to you, it's like the only way you're going to damage it is if it surfaces next to you, and it doesn't need to surface next to you. I don't know. It just seems.
But then the tumor doesn't need to be spotted. So I mean, to me, it's exactly analogous. I can't find a difference between stealthy destroyer and submarine in that situation. I'm totally open to someone saying, actually, no, you've missed this point. But at the moment, I can't think of one.
I'm sure.
And I've been thinking about this for a long time.
Go on. Now, are we talking like, maps surrounded by islands, 2 caps to 1, or are we talking straight 1v1 in ocean? Because they're completely different scenarios.
They are. That is true. That is absolutely true. And it is going to be very situational. And probably, like the way the battles go right now, especially randoms, the chances of it being a 1v1 on ocean, like, that's unlikely, I think. It's far more likely that it's going to be like 5v2
or
something like that.
1 versus 1 with 11 bots per team when everybody realizes this was a terrible idea and leaves.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, okay.
Can't wait to play a tier 4 game with 2 CVs, 4 submarines, and 6 bots.
Well, and one of the viewer questions we've got later is about the number of ship slots on teams and things like that. And we've talked about this in the past in terms of the map feeling empty. And it was the first time I heard someone say that. I think it was Flamu pointing out that, well, I mean, like, if you've got a carrier who you can't see because he's at the back, and you've got 3 submarines and a bunch of stealthy destroyers, basically it's a couple of battleships just staring at each other across an empty map. And yeah, that I think that could end up being a real problem. Especially if submarines end up being popular and taking up some slots, if it's won a match, maybe not. But so okay, so we didn't. So we briefly covered ASW there. So what do you guys think about the 2 different ASW mechanics? So you've got light cruisers and destroyers. Some light cruisers and destroyers having ASW depth charges that they drop off the back of the ship. And then you've got some heavy cruisers, and some battleships having ASW airstrikes in exactly the same mechanic as the Dutch cruiser strikes. So what do you guys think about those?
I fear that we're going to see a spike in destroyers and light cruisers charging into stupid positions under the impression that they must immediately try to kill the enemy submarine.
So we're going
I also expect to see a lot of toxicity from the battleships who are going, DD, go kill submarine! DD, come kill submarine!
And that's initially, in the earlier tests, it was literally only the destroyers and light cruisers that had the ASW. There were no ASW airstrikes. It was all just off-ship depth charges. And the battleships and heavy cruisers had no ASW at all. And we did see that sentiment quite a lot. It was like I'm in a battleship, I can literally do nothing against the submarines, which I don't think is entirely true, but it is at least partially true. So I think that's why we've seen the airstrikes introduced. It was just, maybe they were already working on it for the Dutch cruisers, and they were like, hey, why don't we just use this as a solution to that problem as well? And that's how we ended up with ASW airdrops. But at least now, maybe not all the members of the classes, but all the classes do have ASW of some description. So I think that largely mitigates that issue to a certain extent.
If subs become popular enough and wargaming are not quick enough to apply the anti-submarine capabilities to the ships that do not have it on release, they will essentially cut the viable number of ships by a considerable factor.
I'm just thinking like a situation.
Because if there's 3 subs per team on average in your games, you're not going to take a ship that can't fight them.
It's like, let me just take out my radar Minotaur. Hang on. Oh look, I'm spotted. Let me use my radar. Oh look, there's a submarine. Let me shoot it at once. There, my bloom's up. Oh look, he's gone underwater. Oh no, I am now vulnerable.
This is getting a bit into a conversation I want to have later about what's going to change with the meta. So let's pause that for a second. What do we think about the direct damage being received by submarines over the tests? So this is like how easy or difficult they are to kill, how damage against them has changed, the way that maybe carrier interaction has worked with them. Anything pop into your minds with those? We can talk about class interaction a bit later.
I mean, the depth charges do what they're supposed to do. They kill subs. It's just how you get the depth charge to the sub is the bigger problem. During my testing of it, I never really found too much of an issue with them actually killing subs.
You're a battleship man, though.
Well, the depth charges from the airstrikes worked.
Yeah, this is the thing, is you have the luxury of just sitting back and flinging depth charges in a general direction, along with 10 other people at the same time. It's like, oh, look, a submarine was spotted. All the depth charges, go.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot
the
like
airstrike stacking was bad. You ain't seen nothing yet.
A lot like being a destroyer who gets spotted around a cap, for example. Being a submarine can be very, very similar with the airstrikes because their range is quite long. And, if you're the only submarine on your half of the map, then, everyone's got this armament that they can't use on anyone except you. You bet your ass they're going to drop it on you. Yeah, exactly. So you better, if you get spotted, you better dive, So I think if it's applied, meta aside, if you're a submarine and you get depth charges dropped on your head by whichever mechanism, you're in trouble.
It's been a while since I've done any tests, and the last test that I did was when they had the 80-meter dive capacity if they pressed a consumable. How much damage do you take at maximum depth from a depth charge these days? Is it still negligible? Are you still functionally immune?
You're not immune.
Functionally
they have decreased the time it takes to arm. Whether they've increased the falling through the water column speed, I don't know. That might mean that they actually detonate at a higher altitude, higher depth, lower depth, nearer the surface. So I don't know, because they've changed quite a few things with the ASW since the PTS test. So we'll have to see. But certainly there was no immunity position. You would still take some damage.
Yes, but the some damage was completely negligible at the time. It was you're taking like 2-3 damage. It was.
But then you have to remember that the submarines are also completely ineffective at that depth. So, it's a risk-reward thing. So if you're on the bottom, yes, you can't be damaged very much by depth charges, but you also can't hit anything.
Yeah, but that's fine, because you're still currently reloading your torpedoes from the last strike you did.
True. No, that's true. Yeah, that's true. That is true. But why is that a problem?
Because you're functionally immune between not attacking phases. This is like...
But if the submarines are balanced to have average battle influence compared to the other classes, why is that a problem?
Because I don't think that will have... But, right. It's more about perception and basically them being able to just pop up, drop all their damage, and then you know exactly where they are, but there's nothing you can do about it. Now imagine that for the course of 10 minutes as he's constantly plinking away at you and then disappearing again because there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like...
Sorry, I was playing devil's advocate to get you to say that. So, to me, it's exactly analogous to carriers. Exactly. So, and it is, as you're saying, it's a pure perception thing. If you think about carriers, spotting aside, because I think that is a definite issue, in terms of battle influence and damage done, they're pretty much the same as every other class. It's just that you don't have the ability to fight back. And I think that's going to be the same thing with submarines, as I was saying earlier. People are going to object to this thing that can just throw torpedoes at you every now and again, and you can't really fight back at it.
I would definitely disagree with the statement that carriers... Yeah, but that's because I look at people like Eraser and just think, yeah, no, that's...
Yeah, but you're looking at Super Unicum players who are completely atypical.
Yes, but you don't get Super Unicum players that are that atypical in other classes such as battleships and destroyers, as far as I'm concerned. Not solo, anyway.
Disagree.
You feel free to disagree on that.
But then you're talking about like 0.00000% whatever.
That really? It's likely that the very best sub players will have a more of a disproportionate impact than the
okay. We're getting onto the prediction section, but I disagree with you. So I said we'd have some differences of opinion. Okay. So I think are there any other aspects of submarines that you want to very generally cover before we get into the actual most recent iteration?
Yeah, there is one thing that bothers me. Deep water torpedoes.
Okay.
Deep water torpedoes don't affect submarines. Why?
Apparently they do.
No, they don't.
If your hitbox intersects with the hitbox of the deep water torpedo, it will hit you. No, I've never seen it happen, but I've heard Wargaming say that several times.
I've seen from what Sean and I on the CC Discord replying to my question directly saying, no, they do not interact with submarines in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, that's contrary to what I've heard them say before.
Are you saying that wargaming might give conflicting information on things?
Yeah.
That there might be some sort of breakdown of communication? That never happens.
Okay, so that was an official response in the feedback channel, right, or in the Q&A.
Dev Q&A, I believe, yeah.
Okay, interesting. So what I'd heard, and I've never seen this happen because I've never had the chance to see that interaction, and I've never seen any footage of that interaction. But what I thought was the case was that if the hitboxes interact, then they interact. If they don't interact, then okay. So presumably you would like to see them interact.
It would make a lot of bloody sense.
It would make a lot of sense. Yeah.
But this is just a really weird thing about deep water torpedoes in general, which weren't really a problem. We would accept it until you bring in this extra dimension. But ignoring the fact that these torpedoes, which are supposed to theoretically operate on an extra dimension, which is why they're flavored as they are, with your super deep water torpedoes from your Asashio and your, what's that one? The Fenyang? Whatever it is. And then your regular Pan-Asian deep water torpedoes, these should now, in theory, be draft-based and not class-based, because it doesn't make any sense at all that this torpedo suddenly goes directly through this. It can go directly through this submarine. It can go directly under the Stalingrad, but as soon as it gets to the Mikasa, which is higher in the water than both of them, it explodes. Makes zero sense.
It does, and that's just a simplification that was done because originally DWT was supposed to be draft based. They tried draft based, and they decided, much like players can't cope with multiple inputs at the same time, and blah 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 blah. They decided that it would be simpler if it was class based, presumably not just from a player understanding point of view, which is their public answer to that question, but also from a development point of view, because just doing it. This torp interacts with this class in this way is much easier than it interacts with the current depth of the ship, and what happens if it bumps into another ship just as the torp goes past, and all this kind of stuff.
Can't wait for the Pan-Asian submarine line with its deep water torpedoes.
You have to admit that it's not the most reality breaking concept in the game.
It's one of the worst ones.
I agree, but it's not going to happen very often, and I just from a is the effort worth it from a development point of view? I think I'd rather them put development effort into other things, but yeah, no, I agree with you. That's a bit dumb. Yeah,
I'm glad we're in agreement that it's dumb as hell.
It is a bit dumb, but I can see how they got there, right? Yeah. Okay. So talking more about the recent test that we had on PTS last couple of weeks. And then going into what's going to happen when they go live. So we're going to have, and we've been able to test this on PTS, and hopefully a lot of you got to actually try this out, or at least watch one of us trying it out on stream. So they're going to be in ranked, and that's going to start not this week, but next week. So I think it's the 10th, 12th, the 18th, 19th, I think is the beginning of the season. So as soon as the 10-7 ranked season starts, you'll be able to play submarines in ranked. I haven't actually I should have read the actual patch article, but I think they'll be available in co-op as soon as the patch hits, so that you have a chance to try them out.
They will be available in Armory bundles for free.
So if you haven't had a chance, I would highly encourage you, if you haven't played them yet, because the mechanics are different to surface ships. It's ultimately the same game, but it's some stuff to learn, getting used to ascending, descending, and how the pinging works and all that kind of stuff. It's worth getting a practice in, so I would go into co-op and just spend a little bit of time trying those out for the first week. The other thing which you'll need to get used to is the completely new submarine skill table. So you've got again 4 ranks of captain skills, but instead of it being 6 columns, it's 5 columns. So you've got 20 new skills to learn about. It's probably a good idea to wrap your head around those as well. It's also worth mentioning that there's going to be a free skill reset for the whole of the patch, and you're going to be able to go to a website and press a button to reset all your commanders. What I would actually suggest that you do, because for the entire patch resets are going to be free, I would actually suggest that what you do is save that all reset until the end of the patch, because you can only press that button once if it's like last time. And if you press it at the beginning, and then you fiddle around with all your ships and set them up for ASW, and then decide that that's stupid, and then go back to a normal build, and then you want to try out the secondary changes and all that kind of stuff, as well as setting up all the new submarines, you're going to, and by the end of the patch, you're going to be in a mess. So what I would do is fiddle with individual ships by doing a free reset on the ship, and then playing with it, doing another reset on the ship. And then when you get to the end of the patch, press the wipe button.
I thought what you did was you refused to play a ship because you didn't want to spec it for 6.
Yeah, well, that's probably what I'm going to do. I'll end up playing 3 ships for the next year because I can't be asked. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened when the Commander skill rework went live. Yeah. But I'll be forced to set them up because of all the bloody regrinds I'm doing right now. Because I can't play them unless I set them up. But yeah, that would be my advice, is save that button until the end of the patch, because then you can start 10.8 with a clean slate, knowing what's going on, hopefully. Unfortunately, I don't have the submarine skills in front of me. I could do, actually, because I do have it in Photoshop, but because I tried to create a new set of my commander panels, but unfortunately the skills now are so conditional that there's so much text in them that they no longer fit on my panels. So I'm going to have to figure out a better way of doing that. But I do actually have a record of the skills as they were in PTS. If anyone wants that, please do let me know. I can give it to you. But you'll see them in live in a couple of days anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so in the most recent test, we got to try out ranked and we got to try out co-op. We got to look at the skills. We also got to see for the first time, I think, camouflages on submarines, which is a new thing. Wargaming were debating for quite a long time, how are they going to do the cosmetics? How are they going to do the signals? How are they going to do flags? How are they going to do camos? The answer to that is camouflages just look like normal ships. So the skin of the submarine just gets covered in the camo, just like a normal surface ship, which historically... Killerbin, is that stupid? I think it is.
There's some subs were painted to better blend into the oceans they were in, like a light blue. Sometimes subs got special paints that the crews would get paint and paint their subs.
Presumably, like
not for the full scent of a warship, a surface ship, but some sort of decals or emblems and stuff.
Okay, so the concept of painting a sub is reasonably reasonable. Okay, what about putting signal flags up on the rigging and then diving with the signal still on?
No, that doesn't.
No,
work.
not so much. But that is what happens. So. As well as being able to mount a camo on just like a surface ship, you can also mount signals. It's the same number of signals as a surface ship, so 8 plus specials, and you can also have a flag or 2 depending on whether you've unlocked 2 flags.
Can submarines detonate?
No, yeah, I can't remember actually. I can't remember. Maybe if someone in chat knows, they can tell us. Don't answer unless you definitely know the answer. So. As you dive, the signals stay on the ship, and so you're a submerged submarine with your rigging with signals on it, which, I mean, it looks fine, but I find that a little bit jarring myself because I know that submarines wouldn't have done that. But whatever, it's just cosmetics. Who cares? And I mean, if you suspend reality, it looks fine. It's just slightly jarring if you think about the historicity of it, but oh well, never mind.
How else do you think they do all the washing on those things?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah,
you just hang the washing line outside and then you just go into the water.
So there should be pants. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So standard issue signal flag boxer shorts.
Yes.
Yes. So the other thing, this wasn't entirely new, but we also got to look at upgrades because this was the first time that we saw the tier 8 submarines. So we got to look at some of the upgrades. There's nothing particularly amazing that's worth covering here. They change various things to do with submarines and allow you to choose a little bit of flavor to do with survivability or maneuverability or detectability or whatever it is that you want to do. Interestingly, there's no way to decrease the concealment of a submarine because there is no concealment expert commander skill and there's no upgrade. The only thing you can do is to mount a camouflage, and I can't even remember if that affected concealment.
Which I think is great.
It's fine because it just whatever your base concealment is what your concealment is, which should
be rolled
fine.
Out to the rest of the ships in the game.
I can't disagree with that. Yeah.
Because it just removes choice from players and introduces, like, this is a gripe I have with destroyer play. Newer players can't play effectively against more experienced players because they don't have concealment expert or concealment module.
Because they haven't used the default build, essentially. Yeah.
Or they just don't have the points for it. Like,
or that. Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's a good point. So that's going to level the playing field a little bit with newer players. I wonder whether that's something they've considered in terms of designing this class, whether they're trying to make it new player friendly, like it felt like they did with the carriers.
Are you saying that they might just be trying to bring in a load of new players with submarines and not care about what the older players think about it?
Why would they not?
Interesting take, isn't it?
I mean, honestly, why would they not? Because bringing new players into the game who are going to spend money is going to be their primary objective.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that making them beginner friendly is probably a pretty big, point on their list of objectives. I wouldn't be surprised. Which also plays into the homing torpedo thing and the giving them what I'm expecting to be a fairly shallow skill slope. Yeah. Okay. We also saw a change to the way that pings work. There were various things that were removed and simplified. So the difference between a single ping and a double ping, and what the single ping and the double ping do, changed. So it's now a lot simpler.
Please explain.
So if I remember correctly, if you get a single ping, your torpedoes will start homing once you've got the ping. Whether you launch the torpedo before or after the ping is irrelevant. You can put the torpedoes in the water and then ping. You can ping and then put the torpedoes in the water. The one thing that you have to consider is that when you ping, a countdown timer starts on that ping. And obviously, if your ping timer runs out, the torpedoes are then just going to keep going straight on whatever course they're currently going on. So you need to maintain that ping. And so one tactic you might want to use, for example, is to put the torpedoes in the water in roughly the right direction and then not ping until, so let's say it's a 30-second ping timer, not ping until your torps are within 30 seconds of the ship. And then they sort out their course. So if you ping and you hit a sector on the ship, which, by the way, after this, the PTS patch is going to be wider. They've widened the ping sectors. So it's going to be easier to hit the same spot because they're going to be 50% wider. So, and you no longer have to hit the specific side of the ship. So if the ship turns around, you can aim to the same point on the other side of the ship, which you couldn't do before. If you hit the same point, that's a double ping. And what happens then is the timer resets back to the full duration, but then further pinging has no effect. So you cannot, once you've got the double, you cannot reset the timer until it's run out. With a single ping, if you hit a different point on the ship, the timer resets back up to its maximum and starts counting down again. And so there actually might be circumstances where you don't want to double ping. Because if you double ping too early and the double ping timer runs out before your torps arrive, not only do they stop homing, but also you don't get the alpha damage. So there might actually be circumstances where initially, if your torps are heading off in the wrong direction, you might want to go for single pings deliberately missing the same spot, and then switch to a double ping later in the trajectory.
Can you still damage on pings for some reason?
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Have you ever been in a situation where you figured that it might be worth pinging a different ship to try and home the torpedo towards that one to hit the first ship?
Yes.
Has it ever worked?
No. So there's a lot of things which are theoretically possible, which, like, so this whole thing of curving torps around an island. Yeah, okay, fine. But, yeah, the problem with that is that you have the torps will follow the white line, as I said earlier. So if you imagine like a normal destroyer or cruiser or whatever that has torpedoes, you target your target with torpedoes, you get the white line, which is if they keep going on the same course and speed, that's where they're going to be when the torpedoes arrive. You get the same thing with a submarine. What the homing does is it basically sends the torpedo down the white line, and if the white line moves, it moves the torpedo to match the white line. So if you are looking at a ship that's going behind an island, you can't send the torpedoes out towards the ship, because if you ping it, your torps are going to follow the white line through the island. So in order to curve something around an island, the torps have to already be in the water and significantly on their way towards the target and significantly off course before you ping the target, before it goes behind the island. But you can't ping through an island even if you can see the ship. So the list of things that would have to happen in order for you to torp something around an island it's so hard to do. I don't think it's ever going to really be a thing.
Unless you ping a different ship and make
that. Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm talking about. So you have to deliberately send the torpedo off on the wrong course, essentially. But then at some point you do have to ping the original target or the intended target.
Not necessarily.
And if it's why?
Because here's the thing: if you have two ships with a converging path, what you could do is you could send the torps after the first ship. If that one suddenly becomes unavailable, you send it after the second ship. And then the torpedo intercepts the first ship, even though it's homing on the second ship.
If you can do that reliably, you deserve to hit that ship.
Basically,
because what you're describing is extraordinarily difficult.
And this is where the skill gap comes in.
I totally agree. And I think, if you can do that kind of thing, you should be rewarded for it. Like blind firing in smoke, or using the lock-on on a different ship to get more accurate shots against a ship that you can't see. All these kind of mechanics exploits, if you can do them, yeah, good on you. But it's not going to be easy to do.
Can you ping a submarine to then go under the... Is there any islands that float and don't have a bottom?
No, there won't be.
I don't even think...
There are at the moment, but that's just because... They will be at the moment, that's just because those maps haven't been done yet.
And also, you can't fire torpedoes at below a certain depth, can you?
Question mark?
What do you mean?
I mean, if you're right at the bottom,
so there
are as you can go, you can't shoot torps.
That's not true. So there will be if you are let's take the extreme example. If you are at maximum depth, parked directly underneath a battleship. Yes, there's no way that your torpedo is going to hit that battleship because it just simply can't rise vertically.
Yeah. But you can fire your torpedoes at crash depth.
You can absolutely. You can fire them at any depth. But when you're at that depth, you can't see any targets because you effectively go blind.
What I'm saying is, even if you're at, to Painezor's question, but can you, shoot under an iceberg? It's not really. But I think you're right. It's this whole, using one ship as a ping target so you hit another ship. If you can pull that off in any form of reliable fashion, then you deserve it.
And this comes back to what we were saying earlier about a potential skill gap forming.
But the skill gap is always
but that's a good thing, surely.
Yeah, yes and no.
Because you want good players to perform better in ships, surely. Because the alternative to that, imagine a ship that has a completely flat skill slope. So it doesn't matter whether you're the worst player on the planet or the best player on the planet, you're going to have the same result. That's obviously not something you want. Equally...
This isn't a curve, though. This is a flat... This is just flat, and then in about the 99th percentile, there's a sudden gigantic spike.
I don't think that's true.
Alright, sure.
Don't think that's true. Because the main thing to do with submarines, like destroyers, and I think in terms of the meta, these behave very much like destroyers. As I just think of them as specialized destroyers that have diving instead of smoke, basically. So it's about positioning. So if you're a submarine and you get spotted and you get 10 million ASW stuff dropped on your head because you're just completely oblivious to where you're going, a bit like when a destroyer drives into 3 radars simultaneously, tough, basically, and that ability to be situationally aware is going to increase probably fairly linearly as you go up through the skill base.
Well, I would disagree with that because the sub, as discussed previously, has the instant get out of jail free card of diving.
It's not instant by any means. It's very slow, in fact.
We'd have to double check that.
So what it used to be
spotted at periscope depth. How quick is it dive time versus the call-in delay on the ASW plane?
So to get from surface to safe-ish, let's say safe from shells, right? Because you're never safe from ASW. So to go from surface to safe from HE and AP, because AP now has splash damage as well, It depends on the submarine, right? Because they have different rates. It depends on your setup, because you can actually boost the dive rate with various skills and so on, and upgrades. To get from surface to below periscope depth, which is where you're safe, is around the sort of 10 to 15 second mark. Ish.
That's a lot longer than I remember in the previous iterations.
Yeah, no, it is, because they wanted to get rid of dolphining, because that was a massive exploit, where you could just drive up to a ship, pop to the surface, shoot your torps, and then dive without being shot at. Because by the time the surface ship realizes what's going on, you've gone. And the other thing they wanted to get rid of was CV submarine interactions, where the CV comes along to drop its bombs, and by the time it started its dive run, you've gone. And so they've made it long enough that a ship can react and get at least one volley off, or a carrier can make one strike.
Ah, right. This is for the carriers. Got it.
Basically. So actually now, if you screw up and you are not paying attention and you get spotted, and like there's a battleship with HE loaded pointing its guns at you, and you come to the surface, you are screwed. Because you know, if you're coming up and you get spotted on the way up, not only do you have to dive, you have to stop coming up first, and it's not an immediate thing. So if you're in the process of surfacing and you need to go back down again, it's going to take you maybe 20 seconds to get to safety, and you have very few hit points.
This will play into my conversation about the meta later. Remind me about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. So they have tried, and I think they've again hit a reasonably good position, where the submarine does have the ability to go, oh crap, crash dive, get out of the way. But equally, the surface ships actually do, if they're paying attention, do have an ability to react. And it all comes down to situational awareness.
Is the crash drive consumable still a thing?
No. I just mean like, oh crap, go down.
Because that was a thing.
It was, and that's not a thing anymore. But there is I know, yeah, exactly. But the American submarines currently do have a consumable which is increase agility. So if you need to, you can smash the increase agility consumable, and that will increase your dive rate by 10-15%.
That's negligible.
It is negligible. But it might be the difference between taking a volley and not taking a volley.
Yeah, it's not going to be
the same with diving. Same with, like, you know, you're on the surface and you see a whole load of torps coming towards you. That might be the difference between dodging the torps and not dodging the torps. So it has some value, but yeah. So okay, we skipped ahead a little bit. So spotting. So in the most recent tests, so spotting has become a little bit complicated. So now you no longer have linear dive choice. So you can't dive to a specific depth. You have to dive to one of 4, 5, 6, 7 different dive depths. The number of points you can dive to varies depending on the tier of the submarine that you're playing. Tier 10, I think, has like 7 or 8 different positions. But if I recall correctly, your spotting range, like your concealment range, does change linearly. So even though you can't stop between 2 points, your concealment, if I'm recalling this correctly, does decrease in a linear fashion as you dive, I think.
Fine with me.
Yeah. But you just need to bear that in mind. And it will be, obviously when you're at those set positions, it will be a certain amount, and that amount will be known to you at least. The thing that's not entirely clear to me is when you can see other things at certain depths and why.
That's been the single thing that has pissed me off about submarines more than any other thing. I remember testing them once, and I was permanently given the proximity detected icon, and I don't know if there was a submarine underneath me. I don't know if there was a submarine within 2 kilometers underneath me. I couldn't see a submarine anywhere. I asked, is there I got no response from the other people testing, because obviously why would they reply? Was this just a bug? Was my detection stuck as a bug? I don't know, because the game doesn't tell you. It just says, oh yeah, you proximity spotted, by the way. There's no other data. You're not proximity spotting anything back, but you're spotted. The single most frustrating experience in the game. It's like, I do not understand why I am spotted and nothing else. Like it.
Yeah, And like I say now, like when the patch hits, if you hit H or you go into the port into the concealment section, there's obviously some extra concealment data, because you've got to have concealment versus submarines, because that's not the same as your surface concealment. It's not the same as your when firing. It's not the same as your when shooting from smoke. You have a whole different set of stuff for a surface ship being spotted by a submarine, and the submarines have a whole different set of stuff for being spotted by other submarines and by surface ships. So there's a whole load of extra concealment distances. And then you mouse over that, and it's even more complicated, because you've got like submarine in a smokescreen whilst pinging against a surface ship, submarine under a smokescreen whilst pinging against a submarine. So like all these different combinations, and like remembering what all those are is going to be a bit of a mare.
But it's too complicated to add values like I don't know, overmatch or crop, anything like that to the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to be fair, they have actually listed them all. It's just that when you go mouse over it, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
right.
Why can't we get the other information?
Yeah, like you're going into a you're going into a situation like the common one is you're in a cruiser, the smoking cruiser, or you're a cruiser going into smoke, and you're thinking, oh crap, that ship's a bit close. I'm going to be shooting at. What's my smoke bloom? And you hold H and you go, okay, it's 5.7. I can shoot. You're going to be going into the same sort of situation, but with submarines around, and you're going to be like trying to like scan your finger down the list of concealments, trying to find the one that applies to the specific situation that you're in. So one of the things that they've done after PTS is they've made ping detection bloom now a flat 4 kilometers for all submarines at all tiers. Which it's fine, because it makes it easier to understand.
Is that while in a smoke stream, while on fire, while...
I'm assuming that's while not in a smoke screen and while at any depth.
By other submarines?
Don't know.
Okay, exactly.
They didn't say.
You still don't know, do you?
Yeah, no, they didn't say. Yeah, just you're just going to have to mouse over it once you get in game and see what they've actually changed. But the patch notes literally say ping detection bloom now is a flat 4 kilometers. That's all it says. Don't know.
I feel like after this podcast, so far through this podcast, I understand less than I did at the start of it.
Yeah. I really think especially for those of us that have done the previous tests, I think this is going to be a case of like flashy pen yourself, go into 10.7 in the first week before ranked starts if you're planning on playing them, and even if you're not planning on playing them, and go in and try and just start from scratch and learn how it works.
Preferably in co-op.
Yeah. So okay.
Is this where I get to rant?
Let's just talk about the other post-test changes. So after 10.7 was run, obviously that was a test iteration, and they got the data from the test iteration. I think I got the impression it was fairly popular. There were still people playing it on the second weekend when I ducked my head in. So they've made some little balance tweaks that aren't really little. So what they've done is they have increased torpedo detection, they've increased torpedo range, and they've increased damage across the board for all the submarines at all the tiers. And they've increased the speed of the torpedoes by 20 to 30%, depending on the submarine at all tiers. And so there's quite a few of us right now going, because... they've done, in their own words, a gazillion tests. And so they should be in a position now where they're about to go live with these things. Okay, not in random battles, but they're going onto the live server with the general population.
And they're changing things by
and they're like
5.
And they're like... Wargaming themselves have come up with, policies in the past about changing test ships where they're saying, okay, we used to do this like swing kind of changes thing, where we just completely change the concept of an entire ship overnight. And it's like, we're not going to do that anymore. What we're going to do is little incremental changes. And you'll see this when they balance tech tree ships, where they're like, change the
purge reverse by 30 seconds.
Oh, okay, that's a bad example. And they've stepped back on that a little bit recently. But generally speaking, when they make balance changes to existing ships, they just tweak. This is not a tweak. This is a complete change to the concept of the ships. So they've basically made the torpedoes a lot more effective, which has to mean one of two things. Either they were massively underperforming, and the reason that they thought they were underperforming was because the torpedoes were a bit anemic, and or they are boring.
Funny.
That's the only two. That's the only two reasons I can think why they would do that. Because of course, they did usually, as they usually do, they did PTS surveys. If you got picked up for one of those, I actually didn't get one this time, but I'm assuming that they did them. They will have been monitoring the forums and whatever, and so they will have got a feeling. And so let's before we actually talk about it, because I don't think we've really discussed this amongst ourselves privately. So, Killerbin, what is your overall impression? Did you play the Lost BTS?
I did, yes, a little.
And you played Submarines?
Yes.
And what was in a few words, what was your overall impression of playing the Submarines?
Sleep-inducing.
Mm-hmm. Soporific, perhaps.
Is that a word?
Means sleep-inducing.
Okay, yes, then it's that.
Yeah, sleep-inducing. What did you think about playing against the Submarines?
I didn't really have too much of an issue because I just kind of ignored them.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's so. So Killerbin thinks that
against the old unbuffed torpedoes as a battleship, I didn't really care because it was just like being attacked by a kind of crappy pan-European destroyer. It was like getting attacked by an Oland in a Montana. Like I could take a significant number of torps and go, huh. And eventually the sub makes a mistake because he's bored and he's realizing he just can't kill me. And then I kill him.
Okay. So you think they are boring and not really to be feared. I think that's a pretty good summary of that.
Prior to these
to the changes. I totally agree. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Prior to the changes.
In the hands of the players that you were playing against.
Yeah, against the players who were willing to go on to... Like, if we take the entire population of the server, the number of players who are A, aware the PTS server exists, B, willing to actually download it, and C, willing to actually play the subs.
Mm-hmm. And anyone who's played on PTS will understand that for whatever reason, the skill of play on PTS tends to be worse than on live.
Absolutely.
Whether it's because for some reason it attracts less skillful players on average, or whether it's because it attracts the same players, but they just don't care, and so they just muck around.
No, it's because we're playing against the NA people.
Or it's the NA are allowed on PTS.
Shots fired.
Ooh, Painezor.
Send all your hate mail.
Yes, if you would like to complain, please don't come to me.
I'm sorry for trying to make them lighten the mood,
Okay, so Painezor, you played the last PTS as well, I think. What was your impression of playing the Submarines?
Didn't play the last PTS.
You didn't play the last PTS?
I refused to touch the Submarines for months now because they bored the ever-loving crap out of me.
So at some point in the past, you did find them boring?
Yes. What
about playing against them?
Equally boring. It was frustrating as a destroyer, going and this was back before... This is while the depth charges from planes were still in testing, and it was part of So I can't remember which iteration this was exactly, but it was boring as hell. Like the submarines chasing them around the map just put you at risk for no apparent reason, and it felt unrewarding. It was when the submarines could still go to crash depth, and I'm just like, you know what? I don't care enough anymore to go do all these stupid tests. Whatever I do, these submarines are coming. I'll deal with them when they get here. Yeah, that's been it. I hate their concept. They're just crap. Can I not have them in my game? Or if you're all going to put them in my game, can you not put them where I want to play? It's frustrating. It's really frustrating.
So my experience was very similar. So playing the Submarines initially, like we're going back quite a while now, going back to the Halloween test in 2018. Initially, I was really excited by them. I thought that PvE thing was really cool.
It was.
But the problem was that as the test iterations rolled out, and I did each of the TST tests and so on, once the novelty factor wears off of, oh, cool, I'm in a submarine and I'm underwater and it's new and shiny. Once that wears off, you then start to concentrate on the mechanics, especially as experienced players who can sort of see what's going on. you start to think, yeah, this is actually quite boring most of the time. There are it does have moments, right? So it does have, in the same way that playing, like, you know me, I love my torpedo destroyers, and the reason that I love them is because I love the sort of the feeling of the hunt. I love that sort of sneaking up on people and taking risks and trying to get torps on as close as possible and all that kind of stuff. You do occasionally get that feeling in the submarines, but nowhere near as often. And most of the time it's just unrewarding, because your torps, again, we're talking about the current test iteration, not the changes that we're about to get. Your torpedoes didn't do that much damage. You very rarely got a good strike on something because everything's maneuvering. The homing torps, just because they're so dumb, it's actually on maps with a lot of islands, it can actually be quite hard to get the torps on target. And if you get spotted, you get nuked. So they were just a bit unrewarding to play and a bit boring, and they failed my classic test of I'd rather be in something else. Every single time I played a submarine, I was thinking I'd rather be in a name torpedo destroyer at the same tier. I'd rather be in a Fubuki. I'd rather be in a Shima or whatever, because it just is more fun. And then playing against them, same as Killerbin, I just pretty much ignored them. And then occasionally be like, oh, look, there's a submarine. Oh, it's dead. I never, not once in any of the test iterations, apart from when dolphining was a thing, did I see a submarine like really do something. The rest of the time they were kind of mid-table, bottom of the table, died at the beginning, or just didn't do anything. Now, that might be because players just haven't got a grasp of them yet. And I think it has to be true that over time, players will get used to playing them, and they'll figure out little tricks and they'll figure out little tactics, maybe find some exploits that we haven't thought of yet. Although hopefully there's been enough testing that that's not going to be a thing. Can you imagine if they'd released the submarines like they did with carriers and dolphining had become a thing? That would have broken the game.
It would have had an even greater impact than the rework as it was did. And as a rule of thumb, what we've seen is a panic buff.
Yes.
Fundamentally, it's a panic buff.
And I've seen lots of people say, like, as well as me saying, like, okay, either they're boring or they're underperforming or both, there's also another thing, which is that they don't seem to have a role.
Yeah, they don't.
Because we already have torp destroyers. They're definitely not gunboat destroyers. They're not cruisers.
And the destroyers are faster, have better torps, can shoot things.
They're like ultra focused Asashios, basically. Like their job is so narrow that ironically their job is so narrow that they don't have a role in the game.
What does a submarine bring to your team?
One less potential suicidal destroyer.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
But then there are benefits to being on the surface, and so bad players are still going to stay on the surface and just get killed. I think you're going to see submarine players, or they will go, "Oh, I'm in submarine, dive."
Then time to go hunt the carrier.
I saw players on PTS being, like shouted at in chat in all caps for diving at the beginning of a match. Because the players who know what they're doing were saying, why are you wasting your dive time?
Because I'm new and I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And while that will improve over time as people learn how to play them, and of course preserving your dive juice is going to be a critical part of playing them, and a critical skill you have to learn, there are still going to be some players who just don't care. The Nürnbergs of the world and the suiciding destroyers and the camping thunders and whatever of the world.
Oh God.
Who aren't going to do that. So I think you're still going to see them going down quite early, but maybe not quite as early as destroyers who
Hopefully
can't.
They explode instantly. You won't have the rest of the battle as a normal battle.
Well, I mean that is an argument, right? So when people say, "Oh," my usual response is, I don't think. Okay, in the hands of certain players, maybe, but generally speaking, compared to other classes, I don't think that their battle influence on average is going to be the strongest of all the classes. And so let's say it's the weakest of all the classes. who cares if they're in the battles, other than it basically reduces the number of ships on each team? Who cares? I'm being slightly flippant there, but
I kind of care about how many.
why?
Because I want to have a random battle with 12 ships and I want to shoot at them all. And if you're going to add things that are going to be in their own x-axis or z-axis, you have all the space in the world to increase the matchmaker to fit them in. There is literally an entire dimension to fit them in.
So your concern is that there's going to be less interaction in the battles, and that's going to make it more boring.
Yeah, pretty much. It's
So I also have that thought. I have that concern as well. However, I then think about the fact that you can tell I'm really trying to like these. I'm really trying. But so I currently prefer 7v7 ranked than I do 12v12 randoms. And the reason for that is that in 7v7, you have less to focus on, you can focus better, and people tend to play more aggressively. So I'm actually wondering whether, let's say you have 3 submarines per side, which effectively makes it a 9v9 if it's a carrier match, 8v8. Is that going to mean that people play more aggressively? But then you also have to consider that you're not playing on a ranked map with ranked caps, which tends to focus people into the middle. You're playing on a random battle map where the caps are all spread out.
Problem is, people will be like, "Oh, there could be a submarine over there. I need to run away now," and it's going to make them even more passive.
So why don't we talk about that? So we introduce submarines as currently stated with the increased torps and whatever into ranked as it stands at the moment, and ultimately into random. So let's talk about ranked. So what do we think as 3 experienced players? What do we think that's going to do to the meta, having been through the carrier rework and having been through Deadeye for it particularly? What do you guys think about what's going to happen?
That was Painezor. That
was Painezor screaming into a pillar, by the way.
Yes, the battleships that choose to be passive will have an extra reason to be passive. Battleships that push will be less able to will be less able to take advantage of being able to catch out destroyers who don't expect aggressive battleships, because it might not be the DD spotting you, it might be the submarine that you're much less able to engage. Bad destroyers who charge caps will now claim they charge to try and catch the subs, so destroyer survivability likely goes down, which means battleship passivity goes up, which might mean there are fewer battleships being played, which might make cruisers more popular. But if people are killing themselves in their destroyers more quickly, destroyer popularity might go down, so cruiser popularity goes down, so the overall popularity of classes goes down until the initial interest flare in subs passes, and then people go back to what they know.
Yes, I think I largely agree with that. I think also what's going to happen is people are going, and we saw that, I've seen this on PTS itself. People and the same thing happened when the carrier rework. Like when the carrier rework hit, everyone is just like suddenly going crazy trying to find the best AA builds. If you cast your mind back to the beginning of 8.0, on the first few weeks of that, the only ships that you saw were AA cruisers, battleships that have strong AA, destroyers that have strong AA, because everyone's just like going totally mental about AA. I think the same thing's going to happen with ASW. Everyone's going to be totally focusing everything on making sure that they have the best possible ASW in terms of radar duration, hydro whatever, increased, because there are skills now for increased ASW stuff and upgrades for increased ASW stuff, which of course means you can't take the skills that you would normally take in ships for maneuverability or survivability or whatever it happens to be.
I would disagree with that expectation, for the simple fact that people are going to look at it the same way they look at AA skills currently. If there's not a CV in the game, I'm wasting these skill points. If there's not a submarine in the game, I'm wasting these skill points. Why would I waste these skill points on something that has a potential to be useful, where I can just spend things which are going to be always useful?
And that is the position now, 2.5 years after the carrier rework. It was not the position when the carrier rework hit. So, and I think the same thing's going to happen where initially, especially because it's going to be, I think it's going to be a popular class initially, because it's shiny and new for everyone. So in most rank battles, it was a limit of 2. I think you're probably going to see in a lot of rank battles, especially in the first week, you're going to see 2 submarines in every single battle. And
in Bronze League, sure.
In Bronze, yeah. So people are going to be like, well, there are submarines there, and I've got free respecs, so I'm just going to spec the ASW to the hilt. But as the popularity of submarines goes down, presumably they'll be less popular, assuming that they are less effective. Or players just don't want to play them because they don't like change, which is possible. As you go up through the leagues, you'll see fewer and fewer of them. And so people will change their builds accordingly. And also some people might realize that actually, assuming this is true, running an ASW build is less effective than running the normal build.
Have they changed the recommended skill builds to include anti-submarine skills?
I don't know. I didn't notice on PTS. It'd be interesting to see actually whether they have.
Because if they have, yeah.
And I'm not saying, if they turn out to be a popular class, there might actually be some ships that you might want to take an ASW skill here and there on. I don't know. I mean, that might end up being a thing, especially if submarines with these changes, with the massively increased torpedo potential, might actually become really strong. I mean, we don't know yet. Because, yeah, that little tweak might have consequences.
Well, we all know that wargaming balances around popularity, looking at you, Zhao. Yeah. The recent dev Q&A, they said that they're not going to be buffing Zhao because she is still popular. Despite the fact that the majority of probably the competitive community and a majority of like the regular community as well all kind of just generally say that Zhao is a bit crap. But because it's popular, it's not going to be touched. However, if something isn't popular, then they'll see that as an indication that it needs to be tweaked. Now, if the submarines don't prove to be popular, it looks like they're probably just going to buff it until it is popular. And that's one of our biggest concerns, is you're just going to shoehorn it in by making it OP as hell, not fit into the ecosystem of the game as we would like it to.
Yeah, indeed. Which is why that massive change that we saw at the end of PTS is so concerning, because we shouldn't be seeing that at this stage.
Yeah,
we should be seeing like what they should be doing is saying, okay, well they're 2% less effective than other classes, so we're going to buff the torpedo speed by 2%, things like that. But no, what we're seeing is 20 to 30%, which presumably means that they're either 20 to 30% more boring than the other classes, or 20 to 30% less effective than the other classes on average. Which is at this stage is kind of mind-boggling that they've managed to get that far with. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so I want to talk quickly. We've skipped ahead. I want to skip back a little bit. So I want to talk about interactions between different classes, although we have covered that a little bit. And then I want to answer some questions to close out, because we've got some really good questions from some people from Discord. So let's talk, and this might be slightly difficult. Painezor, if you had, and Killerbin, if you didn't play the last test very much, you might find this a little bit tricky to talk to in terms of the most recent test iteration, but we'll try. So first of all, let's talk about submarine versus submarine. So when you are in a random battle or a ranked battle or whatever, you're in your submarine, and ignoring all the other ships that are in the battle, you come face to face with another submarine. What do you guys think about that interaction?
Crap, or it was when I last played it, because you can't actually ping each other very well, because we had 3-dimensional, and like the front of your ship is like always changing direction, so you're not necessarily aiming at the right like height, and it's a complete mess. The only way you're going to ever kill another submarine is by ramming it, or hoping that they're just like not paying attention and busy trying to tow something. A head-on fight between 2 submarines is going to end in a ram or nothing, or maybe a lucky top if it's dumbfired.
In my experience, it tends to end up in you basically behaving like two really, really drunk people coming out of a pub and trying to have a fight. Like, you're both throwing kind of half-hearted punches at each other, but nothing's really landing because you can't really see the other person or tell where they are, because basically they look like where they were 5 hours ago, and you can't really judge distance because you're drunk. It feels a bit like that. So, because once you dive, if you haven't played them, you won't understand this yet, but once you dive, because a lot of the information that you get in World of Warships about how to lead things, how to aim, comes from the fact that you're looking over the water surface, either, like a normal over the water surface view or maybe a spotter plane view, and you're judging distance based on the position of islands, marker buoys for the caps, other ships, the animations around the ship itself, like the bow wave, the smoke, the way that the ship interacts with the water surface texture. You can kind of get an idea of speed based on that. When you go underwater and you're suddenly looking at surface ships, for example, but especially when you're looking at other submarines, you have zero clues about how that ship is moving other than the minimap and its silhouette. And its silhouette is a silhouette. It's not three-dimensional. It's not wireframe. And so telling which way it's turning, is it turning towards you or is it turning away from you? It's a bit like one of those puzzles like one of those optical illusions you might have seen with like a cube or a face or something that's spinning around, and your brain tells you that it's popping out towards you, and then it gets to the halfway point and then it does it again. You're like, oh, hang on a minute. It's exactly the same as that. It's very hard to judge distance, and quite often you'll launch a torpedo thinking that you're miles and miles and miles away, but actually you're on top of each other, because submarines are very, very small, and the point of view you get underwater makes it look like you are far enough away to hit them with a torpedo with the homing and stuff. And then you launch your torps, and then you ping, you go to your Z view to get the torpedo view, and you realize that pretty much as soon as you launched it, the torpedo went straight past. And every underwater sub battle I've had in all of the test iterations has been like that. And you it's almost pointless. And that has the potential to be one of the most exciting aspects of playing a submarine. And it just doesn't work.
Well, when I did it, it just kind of seemed like bad jousting.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. The chances of you actually hitting the other submarine are, they're not zero, but it certainly
it just seemed to make more sense to just ram him.
But it's not because you don't have the ability to hit the other submarine. It's because your perception is so bad underwater.
The oddest thing I found was that basically submarine versus submarine interaction to me came down to who has the bigger health pool, because I'm going to ram you if I have the bigger health pool.
Yeah, well, there's that.
That's literally how it came down to, because it's not like a random, like, two cruisers charging towards each other. One of you is going to, like, in that situation, you're probably both going to lose HP from other sources and each other from other means. But with the submarines, you're going to be both full health upon point of contact, at which point it's directly ramming.
It's just reminded me of another thing about submarine play that I found really frustrating in the last test. So Wargaming have done I would say they've done a pretty good job with the underwater world. It looks pretty nice. As a ex-sedimentary geologist, by training at least, the above surface islands look pretty good. Subsurface, not so much, but it's okay. They've done a reasonable job of making it interesting.
Interesting is one word.
But one of the problems is when you're at periscope depth, you can't look under the water unless you use the free cam, which you can if you want to. You can do the control shift backspace and go under the water, but you can't see under the water. But you're like at a depth where there are going to be shelves and stuff around the islands that you can't go on top of if you are at periscope depth. You have to be surfaced, particularly on the maps that have those sort of tropical shallows, because they've actually, they have shelves and stuff built into them now, and you can easily at periscope depth get stuck on something and you can't see what you're stuck on. It's like the surface ships hitting submerged rocks, but multiplied by 100 times. And the only way that you can get off it is either like literally reverse, and dive so you can see what you're doing, or surface, in which case you're probably going to get shot at, because there's probably a reason that you're at periscope depth. Because if you're not going to be spotted, why would you be at periscope depth? Because if you're not going to be spotted, you should be on the surface. So, and that is like not being able to pan the camera downwards and look under the water is really frustrating. That's just reminded me of that, because that's something they need to work on. But if you find yourself in that situation, Control Shift Backspace, and then you can use your numpad to control the camera. It might be worth learning how to do that, because you're probably going to find yourself in a situation where you need to use that. So yeah.
And then we'll disable it, because they can't expect people to have to press so many buttons, because if it becomes standard gameplay, pressing R is too complicated for carriers, pressing Control Shift and Backspace for submarines. Oh boy, no, we can't have that.
It would be nice if they gave us a camera toggle that enabled us to enable the underwater position of the camera while we're in periscope depth, or something like that. I don't know, or just like moving the mouse down and it goes under the, I don't know. But it needs something, because that can be quite frustrating. Okay, so submarines versus submarines is kind of pointless and boring. I'm spotting a theme here. Submarines versus destroyers. So before they gave ASW to heavy cruisers and battleships, destroyers and light cruisers are really the only thing you need to be worried about. And I think that still holds, because destroyers are very fast, they're very maneuverable. Some of them have hydro. They all have pretty much depth charges. Not necessarily all of them, but a lot of them have depth charges. And fast-firing guns that can also kill you if you're on the surface. So they can catch up to you, they can detect you, and they can force you to the surface eventually. They're also going to be quite hard to hit with torpedoes, because they're the most maneuverable class. So, to me, sort of running away from destroyers and trying to manage not being killed by the enemy destroyers is probably the most exciting part of playing submarines.
And then because it also finds you.
Yeah. Because basically, so if it's able to push forward safely, reasonably safely, if most of the destroyers are going to go faster than you, and especially if it's a fast destroyer, like a French destroyer, it is going to catch up to you, and it is going to be able to keep you spotted. And it is going to be able to drop depth charge on your head. So that's one of those situations where the surface ship should absolutely win that fight. All other things being equal. Not to
mention that some ships are getting their special anti-submarine capabilities modelled in game, like Friesland and Halland being able to fire their depth charges forward.
Holland.
Yeah, I think even Daring is getting special features.
It's also worth pointing out that people should, if you start playing destroyers in ranked or co-op, you should definitely go and have a look at the depth charge alphas, because they vary significantly between the nations and the individual destroyers, like more than double in some cases. So make sure you mouse over that little depth charge consumable and figure out what it does. So at tier 6, for example, I think the highest was like tier 10? I can't remember. But anyway, go and have a look, because the damage is different between the different classes and nations. Sorry, I suppose classes and nations. So you may find that some destroyers can significantly damage a submarine who is at maximum depth, and others just will barely touch it. So yeah, I found playing against destroyers pretty kind of thrilling on occasion, because you know a destroyer sees you and you're like, oh crap, and then you need to try and figure out how you're going to get out. And then you have to, if you know that there's a destroyer there that can kill you, you have to plan, okay, how am I going to stop this destroyer from charging me if it spots me? And, am I close to a cruiser who can help me? Is there an island I can hide? All this kind of stuff. So it's a little bit like being a little squishy destroyer against a gunboat or whatever. But I actually found that play kind of interesting. And you're not completely defenseless, especially now that the torpedoes are going to be faster and do more damage. You're not completely defenseless. So I quite like that. Do you have any experience with that?
No, I don't find it fun being chased by a destroyer in a submarine.
No, I mean it being in the submarine, being chased by a destroyer.
That's what I said.
Yeah, there's not a lot you can do. Like, even with the guidance of the torpedoes, and the increased damage, especially against the fast destroyers, against the slower, chunkier ones like your Darings and your Frieslands, then maybe you have a chance. But those are the destroyers that tend to have the ability to engage ships that they aren't directly above.
Basically,
so it doesn't matter if the Friesland isn't on top of you, because he can just fire his forward anti-submarine rocket at you, and the Daring with its limbo. And so the ships that in theory would suffer more because of the changes, so long as they continue on with their modeling of their unique armaments, isn't a problem. So I think the subs are at a greater disadvantage than any other class.
It's something weird. Is like the only counterplay you have as a submarine against a destroyer in the current scenario is you sit and try to outspot them. Problem is, every single destroyer runs RPF. If you're not under the water and the RPF beat is on you, which is a stupid mechanic, by the way, your RPF swings away from the submarine when it's no longer at periscope depth. Makes absolutely zero sense. It's just frustrating and confusing. But we don't like. It's one of those mechanics that it's acceptable confusion on Wargaming's part, unlike other mechanics which would make perfect sense. But that's going to be too confusing. But yeah, we'll not get into that. It just seems like if submarines are meant to, in the current iteration, as Wargamers saying, are meant to fight destroyers and cruisers, how? There's just no way for it. It just doesn't fit. Not a tier 10 anyway. Maybe a tier 6, but not a tier 10.
I've killed destroyers that have been chasing me. You just have to make sure you do it before they get to you. Because once they're on top of you, you're dead. So you either need to throw, assuming you're in a submarine that has rear-facing torpedoes, which they don't all have, but some of them do. If you are, then it's significantly easier, because then you can throw torpedoes behind you as you run away and get more shots in. If you're in a submarine that doesn't have rear-facing torpedoes, you've got to make a choice. Do you face the submarine and hope that you kill it before it gets to you? That's pretty much your only choice. Or do you dive and try and escape that way? They're not completely defenseless. And I'd be really interested to see what the torpedo changes do to that interaction. I think of all the class interactions, I think submarine destroyer is probably the most equal, because they both have an ability to do something to each other. What about cruisers? So cruisers, if they're a light cruiser, they get potentially depth charges, not all of them, but are also likely to have things like radar or hydro. Oh, by the way, hydro, assuming they haven't changed anything, hydro, so that you have, as a submarine, 4 depth categories. There might be more points within those, but you get 4 depth categories. You get surfaced, periscope, operational depth, and then I can't remember what they call the bottom one, like deep, or whatever they call it. If you are using hydro as a cruiser or a battleship or a destroyer, you can detect submarines down to the bottom of the 3rd one, the operational one. You can't detect them when they're on the bottom. If it's radar, it's just the top 2. So it's just surfaced and periscope. You cannot detect a submarine with radar at operational depth or deep depth. So that's easy to remember. And as a submarine, there's a 4-point skill you can take. I think it's in the 5th column, which is tell me when I'm underneath but not detected by a radar or a hydro.
Oh, for God's sake.
Yeah. So let's say there's a Friesland charging at you. You're like, oh, crap, it's got a hydro, dive. So you have to dive, if you want to be not detected by the hydro, you have to dive right the way down to the bottom, as deep as you can go, or at least into that bottom category. And then if you're on the bottom, A, you won't be able to see the Friesland, and B, you won't be able to tell that you're being hydroed, potentially, if you come back up, unless you have this 4-point skill.
Meanwhile, the Friesland's dumped a considerable number of depth charges on you.
Well, yes, but particularly, so the tier 10 submarines particularly are quite fast. There's not a lot of difference between their surface speed and their submerged speed. And they can do like 30-something knots. And so
but
if
the subs can't change course quickly.
I thought they can't. But they didn't have different speeds at surface and underwater.
They do slightly. But it's not a tier 10. It's not very much at all, and I think they've changed that since the test anyway. So, so one of the tactics you can use, for example, if you are a tier 10 submarine that has a freeze line charging towards you, you might choose to dive to the bottom and turn left or right randomly, and head off at a perpendicular direction, and just hope the freeze line doesn't guess right.
Okay, sounds like counterplay.
Yeah. So evasion is a bit of a random, but I think that's kind of like, in terms of submarines trying to run away from stuff historically, that's kind of accurate.
Yeah, but with this, you don't get to use the historical argument.
No, I know, but I'm grasping. But anyway, I think destroyer submarine is fairly equal, but cruisers are a bigger target for the submarine. But it's not really true at the higher tiers, but generally speaking, have more firepower they can throw at you.
It is true. Cruisers are bigger than destroyers.
Yes. Well, most of the time.
Oh yeah. Elbig, hello.
Certain ships, yes. But cruisers are a similar threat to submarines as destroyers, because they generally have the same toolkit. Potentially fast-firing guns, potentially hydro, potentially radar, potentially ASW of some description.
Potentially brand new consumable for the next line that they're going to release because we need another gimmick.
Potentially. Potentially torpedoes that can home and dive down and get you.
Anti-submarine torpedoes.
It'll be a thing. There's bound to be at some point a hydro that can detect stuff down to the bottom, and radar that can detect stuff down to the. It's guaranteed to happen.
And then you get submarines with ship-guided missiles. Oh wait, what? Yeah.
Then you've got submarines versus battleships, which I think is most people's, at least the average player. If anyone says, I'm going to quit playing the game because of submarines, the thing that they are thinking is, I'm going to be playing my Yamato and I'm not going to be able to play against the submarines. That's what they're thinking. And honestly, their concern is probably reasonable. But it's no more of a worry, or it shouldn't be any more of a worry, than playing against, in my opinion, a stealthy torpedo-based destroyer.
I mean, overall, yeah, as the battleship main of the three of us, even with changes, I'm not too bothered about having to fight the subs, because, as you say, they are basically just super specialized torpedo destroyers that are worse than... Like, I'd rather fight a tier 10 sub than, like, a Halland.
Yeah, absolutely. And in all of the tests that we've done to date, I deliberately spent way more time playing battleships than I did any other class, because I wanted to be able to address that concern when it comes up from a point of view of experience. And not once did I feel like I was completely helpless against a submarine. Not once. Because there's always something that you can do to mitigate that submarine's ability to kill you. Whether it be maneuvering, whether it be positioning, whether it be pinging other members on your team to get them to help you. Like, there's things that you can do. Just like if you know there's a destroyer out there somewhere, there are things that you can do. It's exactly the same. Yes, they're a threat, but it's a manageable threat. But it's the most actually, maybe not. Now that I think about it, it might be carriers, but it's certainly one of the most asymmetrical of the relationships between the submarines and a class. Yes, the submarines are a big risk to battleships. And then there's carriers. When submarines first came along for the non-Halloween stuff, like the first tests, carriers were like submarine kryptonite, like, because of the way the interaction worked. Basically, if you were a carrier, your job was kill the submarine, because you were really good at it. Certain submarines, certain carriers at least, like Ark Royal, for example. Because your bombs were totally lethal. You could one-shot a submarine really, really easily. So they had to change that. And now I think they've gone a little bit too far the other way. I would actually like to I would like to see... Maisie is drinking, yes.
I wonder what noise that was. I'm not sure that was you.
I apologize.
Pain.
She'll be done in a minute. She's very thirsty. So sorry. She's when she drinks for about a week, and then she doesn't drink again for a few days. So sorry. I apologize. So thanks, miss. Can we go to bed now, please?
We're leaving this in.
yeah, totally. So I'm not going through the edit to try and find this.
No, you need to go through the edit and try and find Killerbin's phone though.
Yes. So currently, I think because so submarines have a very, very low air detection. They're like a really, really stealthy destroyer, and their ability to dive is not quite as quick as it used to be, but they can still kind of dive if you see planes coming. It's not quite the same thing as a ship shooting at you because the shells go really fast. Planes don't go that fast. And so chances are by the time the drop actually reaches you, you're going to be under the water if you dive. And of course, some carriers don't have quite as much ability because they have AP bombs mainly, although with AP splash damage being a thing, I haven't actually seen that working yet.
Something I was curious about with that is Richthofen's arming time on the rockets. Well, not arming time, you know what I mean. Machine gun time is very short.
It is 1.5
compared to other characters. Other carriers.
Yeah.
Depending on the splash radius of the AP rockets, that could actually be like.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. Because that presumably doesn't rely on you getting a good 90-degree hit, because it's splash damage, not direct pen. So yes, actually, AP rockets may have the same effect on things that HE rockets do if it was a surface ship. So that's going to be interesting to see. But my overall impression, having played both sides of it from the last couple of tests, was that carriers are a little bit anemic when it comes to submarines, especially because of the way their DCP works. If you find yourself in the position towards the end of a match where you are a submarine and you're going after the carrier, you have to be aware of the fact that carriers have automatic DCPs which negate your ping. That DCP lasts for a long time.
Like a minute.
So if you are going to try to land torps on a carrier, you're probably going to have to do it manually. I.e. without the pings. And the problem with that without the ping is not you can't hit it, because obviously most carriers will just keep going in a straight line, so you just aim down the white line.
Or not move at all.
The problem is that because you can't ping, you can't do your alpha damage. You're restricted to the lower damage. And because of you're limited on the number of torpedoes you can put in the water, you are limited on being able to actually kill that carrier. So you're a submarine sitting there with a sitting duck that you can't kill because it has this automatic defense system that stops you from pinging it. I think that's a bit stupid. I think that perhaps carrier DCPs should not. I quite like DCPs on surface ships negating pings because it gives you a choice. On carriers, it just makes no sense because the carrier player isn't doing anything. That stunned silence. I assume that you agree with me.
Essentially, yes.
This is the problem the destroyers already have to deal with when they're hunting down the seaway, though. Have you ever been on a gunboat following around a carrier, not being able to destroy it because he's got a minute?
But you're not. Well, I suppose so. I suppose it is analogous. But your shells still do potentially full damage
because it's got an armored deck.
Yeah, but that's not quite the same thing. It's like
it is the same thing. You do no damage because you're shattering on his armored deck for an entire minute while he bombs you repeatedly. At least with the submarines, you can go underwater for the next minute until the Damacon's off cooldown.
Anyway, I just thought it was a silly interaction.
The carrier's having a minute-long damage control.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it's
interaction with every ship.
Maybe it's just stupid overall. But it's the only time I've ever noticed it was playing submarines.
I suggest following around a carrier the next time you're playing a gunboat and see how long it takes you to set them on fire.
Yeah, true. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the meta already. I guess we could extend that into randoms. So Killerbin was mentioning that it's probably going to make people initially at least play more passively because they're like, oh my god, there's submarines out there and I can't see them and they're dangerous. So it's probably going to have a similar effect on the battleships to Deadeye, but for different reasons. So the battleships will be further back, which might make other classes more brave, because unlike Deadeye, there's no advantage to the battleship being further back, and so the cruisers might feel more confident in coming forwards, which might cause the submarines to be more passive, which then allows the battleships to come back in again. So it might actually all be kind of balancing out in the end. But I've just got this concern that it's another thing that destroyers have to worry about. That is my overall concern, is that currently destroyers are such an overloaded class in terms of information management and task management, situational awareness. They've got so many things to think about. The fact that there's this another class that's like ultra, low detection threat that can absolutely torpedo you and detect you. Because that's another thing you have to worry about, going into a cap. Okay, great, there's no radar. Oh, there's no hydro. Fantastic, I'll get this. Oh crap, I'm spotted by a submarine. That's absolutely a thing. And so I'm kind of concerned, because of course, like, what are you going to do in that situation?
Kill it.
But how? You don't know where it is.
You do, though, because it's not like you're going to be sat in the direct circle. Actually, it depends.
But to get it, my point is, yes, exactly. It's very situational. But at the beginning of a match, for example, to get that submarine, you have to go across the cap and get it, and that's probably a really bad idea.
Well, see, when I was thinking about this, the cap I generally think of in my head is North Sea cap. So, like, he would have to come to that island.
Funnily enough, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I'm just as a destroyer player, I'm just a little bit concerned about the information load on destroyers. But I guess that's something that will come out of rank pretty quickly.
Along with a lot of frustration and salt.
Yeah, absolutely.
What will be very interesting, though, is during week 1, with the access to gold during week 1, will the number of submarines fall off as we go up the ranks in the leagues?
So I actually haven't read that. So how's the leagues working this time?
You can qualify for silver straight away. You can play in silver straight away. You can qualify for gold straight away. You can rank out in gold straight away in week 1.
Okay, so you still have to work through the leagues, but there's no time limit. Is that right? So it's not. You don't have to wait until the next sprint.
Yes, which means that if you rank out in week 1, you have an additional, I think it's about 2,000 steel available for the season.
That's cool. Okay.
So you now have a valid excuse to go into like gold league, because you're losing out on probably about, it's like 600 per sprint plus another 2. You're losing out on probably about 4,000 steel by not going into gold.
Sorry, I interrupted your thought. What was your thought about if you go into gold?
Sorry, did I not?
I think you started a thought that I interrupted.
If you go,
don't worry.
Oh yeah, I was on about how many CVs? I mean, not CVs. How many submarines we're going to be seeing in the higher tiers? Will we see less less submarines in silver than we see in bronze? I'm assuming so, because I expect bronze submarine players to be relatively bad. And I assume it's going to be the general populace just throwing themselves at it.
I think it depends, because I think at the moment the perceived effectiveness of submarines is probably quite low, based on the last few tests. But the problem is, with this little tweak they've just done, maybe they're really OP now.
It depends on how much base XP modifiers built into the submarines.
Yeah.
Because if you start buffing the crap out of submarine base XP modifiers so they perform quote-unquote better in ranked, and save more stars, then
this is it.
Problem.
So people don't play, generally speaking. I am an exception to this, but generally speaking, I don't think people play ranked predominantly for fun. They play it predominantly for progression and resource reward, compared to randoms. And so if the submarines turn out to be an ineffective way of ranking up, an ineffective way of getting the rewards, they're not going to play them. If they turn out to be an effective way of ranking up and getting rewards and saving stars and all that kind of stuff, they will play them. And so I think the way they appear to perform over the first week or so is going to massively influence how they turn out to be popular or not over the rest of the season.
Well, as an aside to this, if we assume that a submarine does 0 damage, but we still have one of them on each team, you can have a 50% win rate automatically. It's like, you know what I mean? If the submarines have that little impact, you're going to get a 50% win rate. So it's going to be easy to get your steal if you're in Gold League by accident.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just keep pressing battle, sure.
If you can't do anything, you just make sure that the enemy that you match with can't do anything either, and then you rely on RNG, the matchmaker.
Pretty much. Yep. And obviously, what you've just described is a situation that I'm sure Wargaming try and avoid with their balance changes. So they try to avoid the battle influence being 0, and they try and avoid the battle influence being total. They try and get it in the middle. So obviously, that is something that they're considering. But yeah, I'm really concerned with the fact that they've just made this massive change to the torpedoes, that they are going to be somehow ridiculously OP. They're going to just do this massive, in the way they've just done a massive swing change. There's going to be a massive swing change to their effectiveness.
If only there was a special mode that we could have introduced them into that was, not ranked, but maybe like something like Brawls, perhaps. Or maybe, I don't know, how about this new convoy mode that they keep going on about? Or maybe Operation.
Oh, I would love submarine convoy. I hope that it includes submarines. I haven't seen whether it does or not.
99% sure it won't include them. Just because...
that would be so cool.
That was the point of Subs.
I know.
One thematically themed event that they could have done. Yeah, here's the mode with submarines in. It's called Convoy. Fuck off.
It's like literally what submarines were used for. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So I think in terms of the questions, so one of the questions I've got written down here for us to answer ourselves is, well, how will the popularity change over the season? But because of this massive swing change they've just done to the torpedoes, I don't think we know, because we don't know how effective they're going to be. If they hadn't changed, I think there would have been an initial spike in popularity because they're new and shiny, and then as people realize actually these are a bit boring, it's going to drop off quite quickly. But now, I mean, because things that are OP are generally quite exciting, so if they turn out to be quite strong, then maybe they'll be quite popular, and we just can't tell until we start. We'll know in a couple of days' time. So how do you think? So Painezor, I'm going to ask you, because you take ranked far more seriously than me and Killerbin.
Okay.
How will how will ranked players react to players playing submarines?
In which league?
Let's say gold.
Well, this is all going to depend on how they're performing. If they are shown to be useful, then, it's whatever. There'll probably not be that much. Well, probably be a bit of salty backlash. But this is the thing. Gold is already a salty, toxic shithole. That's the nicest way of putting it. It is full of salt, myself included. There's a reason I don't stream ranked. It's because I end up getting really, really toxic myself. It's just like, oh yeah, that's an amazingly useful position you got behind it. I'm so glad that you've saved all your health, Mr. Thunderer, for this last moment of the battle. Excellent job you've done sitting farming HE. Well done. But I always say it in team chat, and it sounds like I'm actually complimenting them. So, well done. I'm not getting chat banned just yet. But
yes,
submarines, because
the thing is, if they turn out to be really, impotent, and you can't really influence the battle in them, but people want to play them because they're new and interesting.
Well, the biggest thing I've found is the loudest players in a game generally are the ones who don't understand how a ship that they're raging at is supposed to be played. If they do not understand the ship and its playstyle, and they see them doing something that is characteristically unique to that ship, they are going to get mad at it. For example, if they see perhaps a Khabarovsk shooting its guns at a battleship, and they think that all destroyers are supposed to be played as a torpedo boat, this is an extreme example. This might have happened to me during one of my regrinds at TFO, but that's not the point. Then they are going to be vocally, shouty, angry, salty mess. Problem is, rank's already like that, so it's going to make no difference.
Yeah, and then the problem, my concern for the sort of well-being, essentially, of those players is that, if you choose to play the submarines because they're kind of interesting and new and you want to play them, and you might as well do a bit of ranked while you're doing it, that they're going to get grief because they're playing an anemic class
a perceived anemic class.
A perceived anemic
one that
class.
They don't know how to play themselves.
And they're gonna get flack for playing it when that's not really that fair because it's the class, not the player.
I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to lose 50 karma in a rank season.
One would assume, though, that those players will have come to their conclusions whether subs are worth it or not before they reach gold.
Yeah, you would hope so.
You would hope so, but then again, you have to.
But also
you have to reassess how each tier of sub performs. Just because the tier 6 submarines are bad doesn't mean that tier 8 submarines are going to be bad. Doesn't mean the tier 10 submarines are going to be bad.
And that's a very interesting point. So there may be a difference in effectiveness between tier 6, 8, and 10 on average, but also the meta changes between bronze, silver, and gold, particularly if it's at the first day, because of course gold is going to be full of some pretty good players because they're the only people who can actually get there. So the effectiveness of submarines might change not just because of the tiers and the actual submarines and the ships they're fighting against, but also because of the players themselves. Because down at bronze, especially once a few of the good players start to leave and the general skill level goes down, because it will do, people make more mistakes, and a good submarine player can take advantage of the battleship just sitting there ignoring everything, for example. Whereas in gold, it's going to be a lot more difficult to exploit bad play because there's not going to be as much bad play.
I'm very much disagree with you.
No, go, please explain. Go on.
Look, gold is full of terrible players. They have fluked their way to gold league somehow
via saving their stars. Not in the first day or two, surely.
Not in the first day or two, but generally, in the old system, like the one that we've just had, where you had 2 weeks every sprint to get there, you've got more than enough time to fluke your way there and save your star.
Sure.
And those players exist, and the later in the season it gets, the more of them are going to be there. And trust me, gold is not all.
What I was thinking was that maybe submarines will be more effective, assuming that all the tiers are the same. Submarines might be more effective in bronze than gold because there's just more mistakes being made, and ultimately torpedo destroyers, which they are,
in the hands of a good player, stupidity. Sure. In the hands of a bad player, I assume that they do equally bad.
That's true. It's a very difficult thing to imagine. I would kill to get my hands on the spreadsheet.
I want to
look up some of these things.
I want to see someone like RNG Sama. I want to see him in Gold League in a submarine. What can he do? That's but
even then, I think
players in EU. What can he do in a submarine? That's
but I think even with very, very experienced destroyer players, I think it's still going to take them a little while to figure out the best approaches and all that kind of stuff, just like we did with carriers initially.
Can't wait for the reversing submarine into a cap.
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, if it's a submarine that has a significant number of tubes on the back, why not? I mean, there's no reason to play that any differently to a destroyer. And the advantage of a submarine in that position is that a destroyer can't fire torps directly backwards.
There's going to be some weird exploit where you find a position in a submarine where you beat yourself at a 45-degree angle, pointing at a choke point and just firing torpedoes into that choke point.
Yeah, well, sure, of course, or firing between two rocks or something.
Yeah.
I mean, those things are going to come, and I'm sure that there will be spots like that on the new maps, essentially because they are new maps underwater.
By the way, I meant horizontally, spots like depth 45 degree. That's what I meant.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So you're shooting at the surface from the bottom.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. So when you dive or surface, your torps do go out at the angle that your submarine is currently at.
And that's when things are going to get super weird.
Yeah, that's a good point. Which is one of the reasons why they changed the way the submarines go up and down, because when you could do it super quickly, you could do things like pop up, shoot something as you're coming up towards the surface and then diving in. Now you can't do that. Okay, so I think it's a good point to go into some of the questions, because we're running on for 2 hours now. So
standard.
So I think the best one to start with is probably Andrew's. So Andrew asks, these are all questions from Discord. Do you think that Wargaming will scrap submarines if they don't do well in this round of testing and go back to the drawing board? And if not, will they accept the inevitable fallout?
No and no.
Why do you not think that they will scrap them if they fail?
Because they put too much time, money, and effort into it.
Yeah, so you've got to remember these have... So the Halloween test was 3 years ago, almost. They will have been developing them for a year or more before that. So you're talking 4 years of development. And this isn't one person, this is a whole team, multiple teams, doing the historicity and the modeling and the mechanics and all that kind of stuff. Because this is way more than just introducing a new surface ship. This is a whole class with its own mechanics and changing everything else and all the maps and everything. So this change is probably, in terms of expense for wargaming, is probably bigger than the carrier rework. There is no way that they are not doing them. No way. Zero chance that they will implement them. How long it takes them to go into general release is another question. Wargaming have said many times that they will not release them into random battles until they think they are ready. And the fact that they're going into ranked this time kind of suggests that they're holding to that. But they have ultimately invested a lot of money into this, and the Wargaming purse holders and board will absolutely be talking to the dev team going, you need to get these out ASAP because we need to stop spending money on it and start making money from it. Because obviously if you can release lines of submarines, tech tree lines, which they now monetize through early access, and you can release premiums, of which undoubtedly there will be many for submarines. And you know, this game probably has a significant number of players who are submarine history fans who currently don't have anything to look at, and also the game could attract submarine fans who don't currently play. It's an opportunity to claw back that investment and then make some profit. If they stop, they lose all the money that they put into it. So there's no way that they're not doing it. And we know how they handle fallout from things like this through various things which have happened in the past. So, but to be fair to them, this time they are being super, super careful compared to things they've done in the past. So, there may come a point where the developers just lose the argument against the purse string holders and basically get told just do it.
I very much expect that's already happened, and that's why they're being dumped in the rank now.
That may well have already happened. Yeah. Okay.
Now, if only there was a way that they could recoup some losses, like maybe throwing Missouri or a random cannibal anyway back to the topic.
Not going there. Okay, different question. Popcorn asks, we kind of answered this earlier, but subs in their current iteration, so this would be the ones that we played in 10.7 or around thereabouts. Are they fun and or balanced, and
No.
do they fill a required role? I think we covered that earlier, saying I think all three of us would agree we find them pretty boring. We don't know if they're balanced because they've just had a massive change that we haven't played yet.
Well, the fact that they have to be changed so heavily implies that they clearly weren't balanced. So
I agree. And the fact that they just had a massive buff would suggest that they were underperforming on average. And do they fill a niche and role? We covered that earlier as well. I think they're closest to being a torpedo destroyer, but they don't do that job as well as a torpedo destroyer, and so they're a bit bleh. Okay, Pseudonym asks, submarines seem fairly limited in terms of gameplay variety and national flavors. So we're going to be getting two submarine nations, by the way, the Americans and the Germans. The Russians were also tested at some point, but they haven't come back yet.
Nope.
keep water radar.
Don't give them ideas. Other than the
idea.
I think you need to go and read the physics. Other than the obvious premium potentials for I-400, Sakuf, X1, and so forth, what room for national tech tree flavors remain? If nailed to the designer's board and generally persuaded that subs are fun with the barrel of a Makarov, what national features would you want to see from tech tree lines outside of the German, US, and USSR branches? That's a really good question.
Are we playing like Wargaming PR bingo now?
Yes.
Makarov.
Yes.
Okay.
So let me just recap quickly what the flavors of the current ones are. So the German submarines that we're going to be getting in Sen 7 are a little bit better concealed. They're a little bit more maneuverable. They have shorter range torpedoes, and they have a stop dive juice leaking mechanic. So they can pause their dive time counter. Basically what it does is just adds a certain amount of time to your dive time. Whereas and they have non-sequentially reloading torpedoes, and they do not have aft launchers, I think. So all your torpedoes load at the same time. US submarines are less well concealed. They're faster in a straight line, but they don't turn as well or dive as well. Their torpedoes are longer ranged, and they do load sequentially. So when you fire, if you've got, say, 4 tubes at the front, and you fire both sets at the same time, you have to wait for one to reload, and then once that first set is reloaded, the second set's reload. German, it loads all at the same time. And then the Russians, we just simply don't know, because they used to have a flavor, but the flavor of the other two has changed, so who knows what they're going to be.
Right.
They were somewhere in the middle.
So Japanese are going to have 20-kilometer torpedoes with a torpedo reload booster. French are going to have an engine boost. The Pan-Europeans will have 150-knot torpedoes. The Pan-Asians will have deep water torpedoes just to mess with you even further. And
yeah, I think, to look for inspiration for the national flavors, it doesn't have to necessarily agree with the rest of the surface ship nation. But you've only got to look around the other ships to find like consumables. They could have like reload booster and heal and hydro. So the Germans used to have a hydro, they don't now.
I would have given the Japanese subs longer dive times in exchange for better torpedoes, more damage and stealthier.
Which is kind of in line with the rest of the nation. You can definitely play with the concealment.
And the Dutch will have an airstrike.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. I think things like, having like a special talent of one nation, being able to see targets from deeper down.
I think, they'll eventually want a anti-sub subline, and that would probably be the British, because at least historically, the Royal Navy were the only submarine force to sink a sub while the attacking sub was also submerged.
Mm-hmm.
So I would expect the British subs to be the anti-sub subs, okay, which would possibly mean that their torpedoes can rise and fall quicker.
Well, that's one of the things they've just buffed considerably.
But even more so, end up looking like a vertical launch missile.
If I remember correctly, going into live from PTS... going into PTS 10.7.1 to 10.7.2, the rising and falling rate was increased 2.5 times.
Yes, that was one of the most ludicrous changes.
Yeah.
Also, the Italian submarines will have a smokescreen generator.
Did any submarines have a smokescreen generator?
Killerbin?
They probably couldn't make smoke out of the diesels. Not sure why you'd want to, because
just dive.
Yeah, like a sub's get out.
Squidding.
Yeah.
Squidding.
No, I think some German subs, at least the crews, had oil tanks on the deck that were. The idea was that a depth charge shockwave would rupture the tank and not damage the sub. So from the attacking ship's perspective, all they saw was an oil slick come to the surface, and would therefore assume they'd got the U-boat.
So maybe like a play dead thing, where you come up in the kill feed as dead, but you're not.
Ooh, that's a bit complicated. That would. People struggle knowing if the ship's alive or dead or not.
Listeners, if Wargaming implement that, you're welcome. God, I'm going to get nailed to a cross. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say that there's plenty of scope. Because this is a new class, it's got new mechanics. They can add the mechanics to it. I think they will find ways of making them different, because they'll have to. So how many nations potentially could actually yield a full, proper, at least paper tech tree?
Submarines?
Yeah.
Germany,
I don't know, putting you on the spot,
Russia,
but just roughly.
United States, Japan, United Kingdom, Commonwealth, Italy, Pan-European, Dutch, Spain, probably South America.
Pretty much every nation.
Pretty much, because subs are a lot cheaper to run and have a much smaller infrastructure requirement.
not just historically, but also in terms of in-game development.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I think Painezor was saying this. Yeah, Painezor was saying this the other day. Like it's a tube. It's really easy to model.
Yeah, until you get to the really quirky looking subs like I-400, which they've already modeled in an anime form. So I wouldn't be surprised if that model's actually an actual I-400 under a bunch of neon painting.
Don't expect there to be a first collab if they actually come to the game.
Yeah, and
that's why they haven't announced it. That's why I haven't announced the latest High School Fleet collaboration.
Yeah, because I-400 is going to be in it, and you've got Sakoof, which is going to be.
I think
Sakoof would be the interesting one because the whole secondaries firing sap thing.
Yeah,
and Sakoof's got a twin 8-inch gun turret.
Well, that was one of the fun things back in the first Halloween operation, going way back at the start of the podcast. The secondaries on the submarines.
They did work, yes, and we got some of the more quirky subs because one of the subs in that event was the British sub X1, which had 4 5.1-inch guns and 2 twin turrets.
Yeah,
because in terms of submarines, if we say we've got like torpedo destroyers, gunboat destroyers, and pseudo light cruisers,
one with 2 or 3 on it.
Then but with submarines you've got coastal subs, fleet subs, submarine cruisers.
Yes.
And some of the transport subs that got turned into, again, submarine cruisers.
But the problem I can foresee in terms of game mechanics, if you had something that was, had viable secondaries, let's say, or had viable sort of cruiser caliber guns, in order for it to be able to use that stuff, a bit like with the surface ship hybrids, you're going to have to give it enough armor and health to actually be able to do that, like a surface ship.
Not necessarily.
The problem is, if you then take that health pool and dive it, that's going to make a ridiculously OP submarine. Because you can, there's a reason why the submarines have almost no hit points.
I'm not saying stick a full turret on top of it. I'm saying stick 1, 2, or 3 and let you get a cheeky citadel and a Minotaur's broadside.
Sure. I'm just thinking, if you like the submarine cruiser, if it's a cruiser that can dive rather than a submarine with a gun on it, then you're going to have to do things like, in terms of game mechanics, you're going to have to do something like massively restrict its dive time.
Yeah, and that's what was the main problem with Sakoof, was that she was more of a cruiser that could dive rather than a submarine with big guns.
Yeah. All right, let me go Google Sakoof.
Yeah, Surcouf. She was so crazy that immediately they made another naval treaty which banned anything like her.
What the fuck is that?
That's Sakoof. It's essentially a submarine version of Algeri's turret.
Oh wow.
She had an assemblable mast so that she could fire her guns.
That's the first time I've heard Painezor make positive noises about a submarine ever.
Yeah.
I've changed my mind. I require this.
You want this? Yeah, exactly.
You would like Sakoof, would you?
Along with his Belfast.
She also has stern deck-mounted torpedoes.
Oh.
I don't care about the torpedoes. In fact, you can remove the torpedo armament completely. Just give me the gun.
Just give you the So safe to say, there's plenty of scope for national flavour. There's plenty of scope for these oddball premium, things with guns, things with hybrid-y type things. So that there's plenty of scope for it. And if we hadn't already had surface ship hybrids, I would have said the chances of getting a hybrid submarine were less. But now that we've got hybrid surface ships, there's no barrier.
If they do not add the T-class HMS Tally-Ho as the British Tier 8 premium, their marketing team has no understanding of anything.
Yeah. What was it? Just we're going on for ages now. But what was the hybrid submarine, the Japanese one?
Yes.
I-400.
Wasn't the mechanism for it launching its planes? Because I remember watching a documentary about this. Like its nose cracked open or something.
So you have the hull of the submarine, and then on top of the hull, they had a hangar that was watertight that could hold 3 aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm just thinking it would be a really cool animation.
Well, yes. Well, in theory. Well, now getting on to other things that have been released since the last time we did one of these, Burns Carrier, the French Tier 6 carrier, has animated hangar.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Like if they've done an animated lift.
So the idea was because the aircraft was partially disassembled in the hangar. So you'd surface the sub, the hangar door would open, you'd pull them out, put the floats on, fold the wings, put the weapon on, and then there's a catapult on the sub.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so it'd be interesting to see how, if they do, assuming they will.
So
do
yeah,
that.
it would be kind of clunky because when you launch your catapult fighters off a battleship,
I
it's
think
like
they'd
ding,
give
ding,
it the
ding,
Dutch
ding,
gimmick.
and 3 planes appear where 1 is.
Yeah,
I think it'd be the Dutch gimmick.
Yeah, you could certainly do it in the sense of like
you
surface, the nose cone opens, and they just sort of zip out the front.
Yeah, that could be an interesting animation.
Well, I've already done the ECA fart and out of plane, so it can't be that hard to do a submarine.
Indeed.
Okay.
So
that also answers kind of Jirak's question, which is how long will it be until we get sub with planes? I would be very surprised if they're not already working on submarine hybrids.
I can only think of a few submarine classes that actively carried aircraft. There was a few in the interwar period. We experimented with them. Surcouf had them because Surcouf had everything because it's a cruiser, really. I-400 is the one everyone refers to because it was the first submarine purpose designed to carry more than 1 aircraft. But some of the Japanese fleet submarines, what they call their Type A's, also had capabilities to carry a spotter. But that was more due to doctrine, and the subs had to go find things. So they had a plane to make it easier for them to find things. But no, yeah, there's enough. There's certainly premiums for the Japanese to have hybrids.
Mm-hmm.
If they were willing to sacrifice immediate monetary gain, they could possibly make a tech tree out of it.
Wow. A tech tree of hybrids.
I mean, if you're going to do them at every odd tier like they currently do, or every even tier, like, you've got so much room for
you could do
speed running lines. Like, do you know how little effort it's going to take to print out lines for that? Like, in comparison to modeling a full battleship line for the Germans like they've just done, you can dump out if like this
3 ships.
Oh yeah, submarines would be considerate. I would love to get an answer out of Wargaming of since we know whatever it was back then, maybe they've got quicker at it. That it took them like was it 300 and something days to model Hood? From having the drawings to having the model done was like 300 work days for 1 battleship. And granted, Hood's pretty big, but compared to a submarine,
yeah, well, that was from scratch. It's not like recycled components.
Exactly, like 3 to 4 weeks from start to finish.
Probably. I mean, like, unironically, you could just compare real building time of a battleship versus a real building time of a submarine. It's basically the same thing. You're building it from the ground up.
Oh yeah, you can churn out subs much quicker than a capital ship. Easily.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, give me it's like, okay, it's not just a tube, but if you think about a battleship, you've got all of the little, you've got the AA emplacements and the secondaries and all the little bits and pieces of the armor and the railings and the deck and all the superstructure. By comparison, a submarine is a tube.
Yes.
So yeah, it's going to be a lot quicker. Yeah, and you don't even have to think about things like armor plating because it's in terms of the armor, it's just a tube.
Yeah. Then it will be considerably easier for them to produce submarine models than full-on battleships.
And there's less to test because there's no possibility of a gun clipping through a superstructure or a camo not applying quite to one of the secondary batteries or whatever.
Yay! So the test-related question.
Yes. So in theory, they should be easier to get through testing because there's not as much to do.
In theory, could a machine gun from a plane penetrate a submarine?
I would guess
no, because the pressure hull of a submarine is quite thick, which is why most anti-submarine aircraft went very quickly to heavier caliber weapons. 50 caliber machine guns, 20 millimeter cannons. Some aircraft carried 57 millimeter Mollins autoloaders. But that was during a period when the U-boats were struggling because there was better detection aids on aircraft. And so they were putting more AA guns on subs to try and get out of the Bay of Biscay on the surface so they had more time to be able to spend out in the Atlantic. So they had AA U-boats.
Mm-hmm.
Oh god, that's a possible sub branch. They could have AA U-boats.
Oh god,
The Germans built them.
That'll be the pan-European
They
design.
had U-boats with a bunch of extra AA on them, so they could fight on the surface against aircraft.
The wargaming devs are watching this right now with pad and pen. Oh yeah, that's a very good idea.
I mean, because people will complain that subs can't, if a sub's caught on the surface,
Of course
they
they
can't
will.
do anything against a
Of course they
carrier.
will.
So
Yeah,
there's an actual market for that.
Yep.
Ah,
Well, no. So
shit.
what you do is you introduce the submarines without any AA. You wait for the player base to realize that submarines have no defense against a carrier. You wait for that sentiment to build up, and then you release an AA submarine. That's how you do it.
Genius.
It's not genius. It's just simple road mapping. So
we don't do roadmaps, yes, Stats. We don't do roadmaps.
What was it? We don't do roadmaps. We do shipping lanes. Shipping lanes. I heard someone say that once. So okay. Next question is actually two people. So Pseudonym, with Wargaming's current stance regarding the feedback of not enough surface ships from people like Flammo and many others, during the latest test being pretty much deal with it. Insert angry Painezor matchmaking rant here. Do you think new maps will be smaller and no longer 40 by 40 kilometers to reduce the workload and avoid the empty map feeling? And then Killerbin asks, with hybrids and submarines as well as carriers taking ship slots in battles, should Wargaming increase the number of ships in a battle? We kind of touched on this very briefly earlier, but not really. So I agree with this sentiment that having submarines in the battle, so let's say it's 3 on each side in a random battle, that's 6 ships you can't see on the surface, plus a carrier maybe. Maybe there's a hybrid who's not really doing very much because they're busy doing their planes. There's not much left. So what do you guys think about how that's going to be in randoms?
I very much doubt they're going to make new maps. They're not going to make new maps smaller because they've just spent the entire this time taking all of their current maps and adding an underwater world to them. If they didn't think that submarines would be viable in this size map, they wouldn't have done that. They would have just been like, "Oh, we just make some new maps, whatever." Here, as I said earlier, I believe that the perfect place to put these extra 3 ships per battle is in this new Z-axis. You know, you've got this entire new underwater world where the submarines could roam like little whatever the.
Yes, I agree with Payne that there's teams. The standard mode should be 12v12.
Yes.
But if subs are in the queue, there are an extra 3 slots or 2 slots that only activate when subs are in the queue.
It's the exact rant I've had several times on various different streams.
Yes, I completely agree with you. It should be, 12v12 plus submarines if there are any in the queue. Totally agree. And the answer that Wargaming I've seen given, like, why don't you make it random battles 15 versus 15 or 30 versus 30? The answer they normally give is because unlike, say, World of Tanks, where you've got more or less 1 tank, 1 gun, and the gun travels almost instantaneously, and so the number of shells in the air is the same as the number of tanks maximum. With ships, you've got, say, 16 barrels per ship, and, you know, they can have 6 volleys in the air, and there's a lot more work for the service to do to track everything. But that doesn't really pan out in terms of adding submarines, because the submarines, it's a tube that can fire like 6 torps.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not really any, you know, there's not really that argument that you can, like the Smolensk argument. You can't really make that argument for submarines, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. No.
So presumably adding, say, 3 extra sub-only slots on top of the 12 wouldn't, in terms of server overhead, wouldn't really be that much of a problem. And frankly, you just make your servers better.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it's not like they're a small indie company. I'm sure they can afford some additional server infrastructure.
Well, I mean, think about it this way, though. You were going from 1 player connected to 23 other clients. That's what? I don't know, quick rudimentary math. What's 24 squared? You're now going up to 15 to 30 squared.
Yeah, it's true. It's not a linear relationship. That's true. But, you know, plenty of other games have more, so it can't be impossible.
I can't be bothered to figure out what 24 squared is, but 900 for 30 squared. Wait, is it 900 or 9,000? That was 900. So you're going, you know, maybe doubling the number of connections at that. unless it's So it's
24 squared is 576.
Yeah, so approximately, like, you're increasing it by 60-70%. You may as well just say doubling it. It's whatever.
Like, so take rank, for example, like 77. 2 of the slots can be a submarine. 1 of the slots can be a carrier. So you could end up in a position where there's only 4 surface ships on each team. And so the majority of the time, looking across the map to the other team, because of course you're going to be able to see your submarines, but you're not going to see the enemy submarines necessarily, and you probably can't see the carrier. So the maximum number of surface ships you're going to see is 4.
And then 3 of those are DDs. It's literally
quite possibly,
you having a 1 versus 1 with
quite
the
possibly.
other ship until the...
Because no one's going to play battleships because they're all scared of the submarines. No one plays cruisers in ranked anyway. And yeah. So, like, everyone's just going to... In gold, yeah. So, it's going to feel a bit tumbleweedish, I think, at times.
Yeah.
And I think the only solution is to add more slots for the submarines. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think most of the players' opinions who I respect are all along those lines of there needs to be if wargaming is so focused on it has to be quick and fun action. The reason why they don't do anything to change the matchmaker is because they don't want the queue times to be too long or anything like that. Then making it so that there's less stuff going on screen is surely not in their interest.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're trying to make an action game that's, riveting, and adding empty space to the battle effectively is not the way to do that. Okay, Painezor, do you have your pillow?
Yes.
Is it to hand?
Yes.
Kellogg's asks, what impact do you think submarines would have on clan battles and tournaments like COTS in the not too distant future? Killerbin did not have a pillow to hand. I think that answers that question. I think it's very hard to tell at the moment, I think, because, again, they've just had a massive change. We don't know the impact of that change yet. I actually wonder if you ran a COTS right now with the tier 10s as they're going to be in tier 7. Sorry,
and
in
all
10,
of the
7.
orgs would tell you to write off.
Well, but let's just think about it for a second. If you ran COTS right now with the tier 10s, and you said you can take submarines, there's no cap. You can take submarines if you want to. No carriers. So COTS exactly as it was last time, but you can take submarines. Do you think that any of the teams would take a submarine?
Some teams would take it, yes.
Yeah.
The teams who I think have a chance of winning, likely no.
It's after the massive batch of changes, I don't know enough about the individual submarines to be able to make an informed decision on this. But there will be players who will research timings and realize, actually, you know what? If I time this submarine just right here and I get this spawn position, I can torpedo this, and this, and get into this position and just
Or the spotting mechanics of that particular submarine in that particular position are great for countering this. Yeah. So it might be.
But these would be niche strats for specific maps, not a global pick.
Yeah, and relying on specific spawns, which you can't guarantee. And so I think most of the good teams will look into the possibility and viability of submarines.
And then they would just petition to get them banned instead.
Yeah, and they'd be like, no, this is stupid.
Like, the competitive community, this is a non-question for the simple fact that I can't imagine this happening in COTS because everyone will push back against it so hard. The competitive community is very resistant to change. They do not want the carriers in the King of the Sea. They are certainly not going to want submarines to back them up.
Yeah, no, the serious competitive community is the most conservative part of the game's player base. Yeah. One of the most vocal, and it's one of the most conservative.
Yeah, especially if we've just had a tournament, which I think the last COTS can be considered pretty successful. If we've just run a tournament which was generally considered to be good fun and it worked, and everyone liked everything pretty much, they're not going to want to just don't fiddle with our meta basically because we like the way it was, and introducing something new is just pointless.
Yeah, that would absolutely be the fundamental response, which is just for like, what we have now works.
Yeah.
No carriers, no petro, ship bans. It works. Let's just keep going with this. Like, new ships and balance changes will keep the meta fluid enough for competitive.
Yes,
Don't
I
need
agree.
double carriers at tier 6.
Clan battles, however, I think is a different prospect because, of course,
They'll end up in clan battles. If
they will end
in
up in clan battles. They have to.
If they end up in randoms, they'll be in clan battles. They'll probably share matchmaking slots with destroyers, so you can take one or the other for a maximum of, depending on the team size, let's say 3.
But assuming they keep going with the restriction system, let's say the submarines. So if submarines turn out to be a non-thing that no one bothers with, then it doesn't matter, unless they buff them ridiculously to get them back in again. But that's another matter. But if they turn out to be really powerful in certain situations on certain whatever comps, then if every team is taking, like, I don't know what the limit would be, but if every team is taking like 5 submarines, then their mechanic of restricting them would kick in. So I don't think that would be too much of a problem, in the same way that it's not too much of a problem with any of the problem ships right now in the last couple of seasons. Initially, it will probably be quite painful, and then that kicks in. Okay, so this last question is kind of tricky.
No, I've actually got a really good answer for it.
Oh, have you? Okay, so Lodra Hill, it's the last question before we finish. Lodra Hill asks, great question, if you were in charge of the development and could implement your dream version of submarines, what would it look like? How should they play? What would their role be? What were the mechanics do you think they should have? Aside from, I would scrap the idea and not implement them at all, Painezor.
Basically, I would use the original version of submarines that we got in the operation. I would go that far back. I would take those submarines which worked, I would put them in operations, and they would stay in operations. And then I would actually occasionally consider bringing them out into convoy modes or other alternative game modes. They would just not be in random or ranked battles. They're still in the game. They're still going to be in PvP modes. They're just going to be. I would also bring them out in brawls occasionally, but they would not be in this core random game because they simply do not fit.
Yeah,
I 100% agree with what Painezor. Like, they deserve to be in the game because of their significance, but the game that they have developed, I don't think submarines would fit well in a 12v12 random rank format or anything like that. But in convoy modes, brawls, other search modes, I think that would be quite effective.
I would love to see a PV, like an operation like PvP mode, like what they've done with asymmetrical battles, like space battles. Yeah, exactly. So you've got one team that's like we're about to see, kinda. One team that's in surface ships, they're protecting some bot convoy, like goods ships, and then the other team is submarines. I think that would be really fun. But you're right, they just currently, right now, they just feel like this misfit ugly duckling that doesn't really work. They play a bit like destroyers, but they don't really do the job as well. But winding back, and putting myself in the position of the development team, probably would have ended up in a very similar place if I was in charge of the development team. In terms of trying to implement them, if the boss says do submarines, yeah, you've got to find a way of doing it. And honestly, I think some of the decisions that they've made, I can't disagree with them. Okay, maybe with the mechanics, we might have ended up being slightly different, but ultimately, they probably would look pretty similar to what they look like now.
The thing is, like, we all agreed at the start of the stream that when we played the Halloween operation, we found it fun.
Yes.
It's not because they were brand new and shiny. It was just actually a relatively fun game mode. And
yeah, that's true.
Somehow, in the course of all this, all right, we're going to develop all this underwater world, and we're going to make all these new ping mechanics, and you've just lost the essence of what made them fun. And back in the operation, the surface ships had interactions with us. They shot at us. We died. We got torpedoed by them. We died to them. It was a thing. Like, their interaction was actually quite healthy in that state because you were limited to just the 3 depths, and they could just, run over the top of you. You could still pop up and down, but as soon as you popped up, you got shot back at. It wasn't that you were stayed at maximum range sniping with torpedoes because you were a very slow ship. And the original design of them, which was fun, wouldn't fit in the random battles because of the slow speed of the ships. You would simply just get rolled over every single time. But that's the only way that would be fun. So there is simply no way to fit a fun version of Submarines in the current state of the game that I can think of. And Wargaming clearly are in the same situation because they've tried so many different things and they're not in a position to put them in the game yet. Otherwise, they'll be in already.
And like I said, it's that's probably not the development team going, oh yeah, no, we can totally fit these. It's probably, management saying, no, you will. And the developers just trying to find the best possible way that they can
will fit, comrade, yeah?
of putting them in without killing the game. So, because, okay, it's not going to say this exactly, but they'll have a list of requirements, like key requirements, and I guarantee in that top 10, 20, whatever it is requirements, they've got one of them is don't kill the game. They're just trying to be as careful as they can. Yeah, exactly. So it's a really good question. It's a really hard one to answer, but I think we all agree with each other pretty much that they just don't really fit, and it doesn't matter who you throw at that problem. It's just a really hard thing to implement without making them pretty much just destroyers. So yeah, we are where we are. Okay, I think after nearly 3 hours, that it's seriously been 3 hours. This might be our longest one ever on a single topic. What I would suggest that we do is we're getting the patch this week, so tomorrow, imminently, if you're on CIS and NNA, Thursday for C and EU. So by the time you listen to this, if you're not watching it live, probably you've already got access to the submarines. You'll be laughing at our stupidity. So what I suggest we do is we reconvene in 2 or 3 weeks, and we think back about what we said and go, oh, weren't we stupid? Or nod sagely and say how wise we were.
Season goal league then?
No. Can't be asked. So although I kind of want to play with the tier 10 subs because we'll see. We'll see. So do either of you have anything else about submarines that you would like to add?
Hashtag subs out. I don't know. No, nothing in particular. Like I can meme about it all I want, but generally I'm not looking forward to this implementation, and I think it's going to ruin my ranked season. If they are popular enough to propagate into the Gold League, which I don't think they will, but they might.
Let's see. Killerbin.
I think at this point it's just a case of duck and cover, wait and see.
Yeah, pretty much. If they hadn't made that huge change just before go live, I would have had a more concrete, set of predictions. But given the size of that change to the torpedoes, I think it's all up in the air right now. So we shall see. So that brings us after 3 hours to the end of this 9th episode of StatsThonk. Many thanks to my co-hosts Killerbin and Painezor for joining me. You can find the links to their channels in the description for this episode if I remember to put it down there. And also you can simply go to twitch.tv/Killerbin and twitch.tv/Painezor with an E in the middle and drop them a follow. Killerbin generally streams Warships on Mondays and War Thunder at the weekends. And Painezor generally streams Warships on Thursdays. And both of them will be joining me this weekend to cast the Summer Clash 3v3 official tournament on the official WoW's Twitch channel. I think it's also going to be restreamed to all of our individual channels. So if you want to hang out in a slightly quieter chat and talk amongst yourselves, you can. So please do drop in and watch that. I think there's also going to be some little somethings for the viewers. So please do drop in. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe on whichever podcast platform you're listening on. If you've listened on YouTube and you'd like a more convenient way of listening, this podcast is also available on Podbean, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, and on your Alexa device via TuneIn and all other good podcast listening services. We'll try to get episodes out as often as possible, but this is very much a side project for me, and sometimes other things just get in the way. So apologies for the gap since the last one. We will try and get back on it. Many thanks to those who submitted questions in the Discord. If you would like to submit a question for a future episode, please keep an eye out for the channel and a ping. And if you have any ideas for topics, please do let us know as well. I've been Stats. You can find me at twitch.tv/StatsBloke on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Take care of each other, and we will speak to you soon.
Bye.